we do the same and keep a timely pace with the afternoon sessions. I'm going to have to go about. I thought that I was talking with about. Hold it like this. All right. So I'm going to call things to order at this point for our afternoon sessions. $6 million. Don, you are one of my favorite. Yeah, right. So we're going to start the afternoon session, and we're going to start the afternoon session the same way as we started the morning session. The morning session, we started with someone who would address the priorities with a viewpoint from Kyiv. This afternoon, we're going to start that session. It's going to be run by my good friend, Mykola Hryckowian, who is the DC director of Pyziur, of the Center for U.S.-Ukrainian Relations, and he will be running a session with someone who I just simply want to say one word about or two. That is Ambassador Roman Popadiuk, Dr. Roman Popadiuk, was our first ambassador, the first U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. Put that in context. I think Mr. Chumak complimented him about that he was the sort of pathfinder for all this. He saw a Ukraine that was post-Soviet, and he's been with the story since then. And I just saw another ambassador walk in, who is another one of our great veterans, John Herbst. So I'm passing it to you, Mick, because I know that you'll run a nice session for us.
Thank you, Walter. So it's a great honor for me to introduce Ambassador Popadiuk. Not only was he the first ambassador of the United States to Ukraine, he's also a fellow New Yorker, a graduate of the CUNY University system, undergraduate and graduate, and also his family was part of our community. And I know when Ambassador Popadiuk was named the first ambassador to free Ukraine, we were all very proud of that. So as Mr. Chumak said, Pan Roman was one of the main builders of Ukraine, but from the American side. And also we're focusing in on this session of Ukrainian recovery. And this reminds me of something that Mr. Chumak said, but also something that I heard in Odessa on one of our trips with Herman Pirchner, where we had a meeting with local civil society representatives. And this was in the early days of 2023. And they all said, we want to not only win the war, but we want to win the peace. And one of the key things they talked about was corruption. So, and that's so important in the development of a free Ukraine and what happens to Ukraine after this war is over. So I'd like to introduce Ambassador Popadiuk, as everybody knows, the first U.S. ambassador to the United States, to Ukraine. He's currently the president of the Diplomacy Center Foundation, previously director of the World Affairs Councils, and he's a member of the Council of Foreign Relations. Ambassador Popadiuk, the floor is yours.
Is this on already? All right, good afternoon, everyone. Mykola, thank you very much for that kind and very generous introduction. Your mention of my being involved in the early stages of Ukraine's independence brought back a flashback of very fond memories of my interaction with President Bush, Jimmy Baker, the late General Brent Scowcroft, who was National Security Advisor at that time, and of course with Leonid Kravchuk, the first president of Ukraine. So very fond memories of those times. I was asked by Walter to speak about reconstruction from the U.S. perspective. First of all, Walter, I want to thank you for inviting me, and I congratulate you again on what I've heard so far, another very successful conference and many more to come. So thank you very much for having me here. I don't know if there's such a thing as a unique U.S. perspective of reconstruction. I think the views from Ukraine and from Washington basically dovetail. But what I'd like to do is basically just do an overview of how I see the situation evolving, and then maybe take a few questions from the audience. When you look at the situation, we're 3.5 years into a very, very serious war between Russia and Ukraine. Yet we are all talking about reconstruction and development of Ukraine, and rightly so, because the war will stop at some stage and in some manner. And then the whole process of rebuilding Ukraine will take place. And at the outset, I'd like to say when that stage finally arrives in earnest, Ukraine has the opportunity to be the first state in history to be the modern built state, both from the perspective of technologies that are currently in play around the world and in terms of construction materials that are out there. So think of it, this will be the first modern state that will be built basically from the ground up, given the vast destruction that took place. And the destruction has been very big. There's been two types of destruction. One is obviously emotional, and the other obviously is the physical. And it's good to remind everyone about the emotional destruction that has taken place in the country. And we could start with the casualties, for example, both on the Ukrainian side and on the Russian side. When you look at the military situation, it is estimated that about 1 million casualties have been suffered on the Russian side, of which about 140,000 of them are deaths or so. And on the Ukrainian side, 400,000 casualties, of which about 60,000 or more are deaths. So there's been a big attrition in terms of the military forces. But on the civilian side, Ukraine has suffered over 13,000 casualties and about 31,000 wounded civilians. And then when you take a look at the emotional trauma that has taken place among the children in Ukraine, from the bombings of schools, the destruction of schools, and the inability of students to attend schools, to the fact that the Ukrainian government estimates on the conservative side that about 20,000 children have been abducted by the Russians and are being Russified against their own country and their own culture. That gives you a big traumatic feeling in terms of what the country's going through. And on top of that, of course, there's the big economic and financial loss that has taken place, and that's what we're here to address this afternoon. The World Bank, along with the Ukrainian government and the UN, has done estimates over the last few years of how much it would cost to reconstruct Ukraine. And each year, those estimates keep going up and up. The latest estimate drawn from December of 24 is, I think, $524 billion. And quite frankly, I think that's on the low end. I think this is going to be north of $1 trillion to rebuild the country. But the estimate currently is $524 billion. And in terms of the sectors that have been most impacted, the three top sectors are housing, transportation, and energy. Those are the three main sectors that have been, devastated. And in terms of geographic scope, obviously this has all been in the Donbass area, Kherson area. About 3/4 of the damages have been those areas where the front line, obviously, fighting is taking place. So geographically, we know where it's taking place. In terms of costs, we have a rough estimate. But we've taught you just before this session, we had the agriculture session. I'd like to remind people that agriculture has taken a big hit. We talked about the perspectives of Ukrainian agriculture and the abilities of Ukraine to produce, but about 14% of Ukraine's agricultural lands have been impacted by the war. And what do I mean by that? I mean, in terms of the mining of fields and obviously the lands, and in terms of the bombing, the contamination that bombing has place, it's going to cost billions of dollars to decontaminate the soil and to bring it back into productive use to produce foods, grains, etc. So there's a big agricultural, cost that Ukraine's going to have to suffer through in order to get a lot of its soil back on course. In terms of what is being done, I think you have to look at it from two perspectives. One is the Ukrainian perspective, and then from the international perspective, and then I'll get into the US perspective. Ukraine realizes it's going to have to tackle this, and it's already started the process. They even have Advantage Ukraine. I'm sure you could look it up. It's an online website where you can go and query what kind of investments Ukraine needs and how you can get involved in terms of investing. So if you're interested in investing in Ukraine, I urge you go take a look at that website and see if there's anything that fits your model if you're a business person. But the Ukrainian government has also taken a focus at the local level. It's working with local communities, particularly in the areas of housing. Housing is going to be a major issue, as I mentioned. It's the first sector that I mentioned in my comments here in terms of the big hit that it's taken place. The international community is wholly involved in terms of trying to help Ukraine move through this. We've had four pledging conferences. The fourth one just took place in July in Rome, and the pledges came in at $4 billion to help Ukraine tackle the current situations in terms of its needs. But outside of that, we've had the European Union, the IMF, and the World Bank all being very much involved in terms of providing funds for Ukraine. The European Union, through its Ukraine investment facility, is working to provide monies for, I keep saying it, housing, social services, electrical grids, et cetera. And I think they have a fund of about 60 billion euros to help Ukraine through the process. The World Bank, for example, is providing funds also for electrical services, and it's providing grants in this respect. The IMF is providing something like $27 million to help Ukraine in terms of its fiscal needs, monetary policy, et cetera. So on all levels, the international community is very much involved. Now, one key aspect that has been much in play in discussion, I think I've heard some people mention this at some of the panels, is the $300 billion in frozen assets that Russia has overseas, about 2/3 of which are frozen in Belgium. There's been a lot of discussion that these assets should be taken over and given to Ukraine to help in Ukraine's reconstruction. I personally am one that would favor something along those lines. As we all know, I think the European Union has moved to take the interest off of these assets and provide them to Ukraine. I think the goal right now is like $50 million that would be provided to Ukraine to be able to use these funds. I'm sorry? Millions, yeah, in interest. They're not taking the principal. That's a good point. The reason that they're not taking the principal is manifold, but one is legal. Is it legally possible to do that? And then, of course, there's a political issue. If you start taking the principal from the Russians, what's to prevent other countries from starting to do the same when there's a political conflict between countries? So there's that big legal debate and the political debate. I myself don't see this as a debate. This is a country that started a war should be punished. I mean, there's got to be a ground rule for some kind of mechanism to start using these assets. So I, for one, wouldn't mind seeing this money being used for Ukraine's benefit in that respect. Unfortunately, that's still being tied up, but at least there's been a compromise to start using the interest from those funds. So any little bit will help Ukraine in this respect. In terms of the U.S. role, I would point to two things in terms of the U.S. Number one, there was a lot of fanfare a few years back when the BlackRock reached an agreement with the Ukrainian government to provide advice to create a fund to attract investors into Ukraine. And the goal was to raise something like $2.5 billion. And this agreement or mandate was reached between BlackRock and the Ukrainian government back in 23. And unfortunately, at the end of 24, the beginning of this year, January 25, I should say, that agreement was abrogated, terminated, ended. And the reason, first of all, no money was raised. That's the first thing. So they didn't really raise any money. They was trying to set a roadmap and engage interest in Ukraine. And they gave a number of reasons for determination of this project. Number one was there was no interest in the project. And I can return to that. And then there was the other issue of uncertainty, how things were developing in terms of the war and other situations. And also, quite frankly, as I understand it, the BlackRock was also concerned about the administration's policy position, the way it was moving and which direction it would take. So that agreement, unfortunately, was terminated. And that's a bad signal to the private sector. Because if you have a big organization like BlackRock pulling out, that doesn't augur very well for the private sector. And there are a number of reasons, I think, that BlackRock pulled away and why a lot of private investors, particularly in the United States, are not eager to enter the market. And there are a number of challenges that Ukraine will face in terms of attracting private investments for its reconstruction. One of these, obviously, is the current war situation. But looking beyond the war situation, what sits in the back of the mind of a lot of people is what kind of peace will there be and how will it impact the stability of the country? Is this going to be a lasting peace, or is this just going to be a short-term ceasefire type of peace? So there's concern of what's going to evolve. And I can tell you, for example, that I've spoken to large U.S. corporations and talked to them about getting engaged and all. And there are two things they always pointed to. Number one is guarantee of payment. Will they get paid for any work that they do? The other thing is safety of the workforce. How safe will their workforce be? The last thing you want to do is send a workforce into Ukraine that gets bombed, and then you don't get paid on top of all that. So you lose lives, you lose resources. So, this is all intermingled, and these large corporations, are hesitant to expose themselves to something like this. And one of the things that you're going to need in order to get the country moving is we talk about private investment, and I'm speaking about private investment, but I don't think private investment is going to be in the forefront. You're going to need large government expenditures to prime the pump and to give political and economic guarantees to the private investors to be able to attract them to come in. So that's going to be very important. If you don't get the big government money, either unilaterally, bilaterally, like U.S. investment, government money, or, the EU, or large grants from the World Bank, from international organizations, it's going to be very, very hard, I think, to attract private investment into the country. There will be private investment, but not in the scope that you would want. Plus, you're going to need a peaceful, arena in which to operate. But the other problem Ukraine faces, and we spoke about, the refugees that are people that have fled the country. You've had some like 6 million people flee the war zone in Ukraine and are resettled in other countries, including in the United States. You have 1 million, I think, in Germany, 1 million in Poland. You have something like 200,000 here in the United States itself. Ukraine right now is facing a dearth in the workforce. They need semi-skilled and skilled workers, and there's a shortage of that. And the issue is, will you be able to attract those workers to come back? And this comes back to the original point I just made. What kind of peace will there be that you can attract these people back, and what kind of investment will there be from the international community to be able to attract these people back? And what kind of lifestyle can you provide these people in terms of housing, education, medical care, etc.? So this is kind of a difficult riddle to solve at this time. Nobody will know how it will evolve. Everyone is hopeful that enough funds will be available and that you'll be able to attract these people back. I'm ever the optimist, and I expect that a lot of people will come back and want to partake in rebuilding their own country. So the peace process, the workforce issue is a challenge. There are other challenges that Ukraine will face in terms of getting the investment. And you've all heard of this probably during the course of this conference already, and that is the corruption issue. There's no need to get into that in depth. You're all familiar with the issue of corruption. Companies are, not very keen about getting involved with countries that are very corrupt. We have our own Foreign Corrupt Practices Act in terms of the rules and regulations that our own companies have to follow in order to operate overseas, and that becomes a challenge in Ukraine for many of these countries. The other problem in Ukraine, and I think you heard Mr. Chumak speak about this, is deregulation. The bureaucracy is just immense in Ukraine in trying to get a program going or a project going. And of course, that in itself feeds corruption in the country. You have to get rid of those layers of bureaucracy. And by doing so, you speed up the process to get the projects undertaken. But at the same time, you also undermine the chances for increased corruption in the country. So those are all very, very important. So these are the type of challenges that Ukraine will face. Now, going back to what the United States is doing, I think there's a lot of hope and expectation with this minerals agreement that we had reached bilaterally earlier this year with Ukraine. And just recently, I think it was at the beginning of September, the United States allocated $75 million for the minerals agreement, and Ukraine did a matching grant of $75 million. And part of the minerals agreement, I would say there are two things of it. It's in investment into minerals and into infrastructure and energy. But equally important, it's to create a reconstruction fund where the funds go into this fund and the monies will be used to help Ukraine develop its industries in these various sectors. So it's a start, and it's a signal to our investment community, and it's a strong signal. And I hope that the private sector in the United States looks upon, that Ukraine is going to move forward, because the U.S. government is now starting to get involved in terms of investments. So that's very, very important. But one last thing I'd like to point to, and Chumak made mention of this, is the Unity Club. The Unity Club is something that I'm involved in, and Mr. Chumak started the club. And basically, the Unity Club is a group of experts that are being drawn from around the world to be able to provide expertise to the Ukrainian government, provide roadmap of how to move in various sectors. It's a nonpartisan association. It's citizen-based. It's not tied to any government, either U.S. government or Ukrainian government. It's purely on a voluntary basis. So it shows that there's a great interest in the Ukrainian business community to get a process going to stimulate investment and to start moving forward. I think I'd like to maybe end at this point. I know I haven't gone into depth in specific areas because there's so much to cover here, but I'd be happy to address any questions that anybody may have or take any comments. So I'd just like to, Walter, if it's okay, open the floor to questions.
Max? Go ahead. You had to stand up first. Max?
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. I've introduced myself. I'll be on the panel next. I'll be reintroduced. So without any further ado, the question, or at least the setup. There was a book called Small Wonder, and it's a story of Volkswagen. At the beginning, it describes a situation where Ford Motor Company is sitting in a room and they're talking to the people divvying up the assets of Germany. And they're offered Volkswagen, and Ford declines it, saying, well, we don't think that these are assets that would fit into our business strategy. Imagine a situation where Ukraine prevails and it rises. Russia, the leadership finally is demolished, and you have a situation where you potentially have to divvy up the assets of Russia. Backtrack one step. In 2022, there was a big fundraiser for the Kiev School of Economics at the Harvard Club in New York. There's a person with the last name of Sonnenfeld. He's at Yale University, and he said that Ukraine needs $1 trillion to rebuild. put Ukraine in the situation much like the United States was in acquiring the assets of Russia. Let Ukraine get Gazprom. Let Ukraine control the movement of the production and the movement of natural gas from what will someday be just a rump state into other parts of the world. It's at that point that you have an in-country and you, I'm just curious as to what your comments on that.
For the breakup of Russia?
You've been there.
Well, I'll hold an auction right now. Anybody?
The Chinese will be there first.
That's just it. Give Sakhalin to the Japanese.
Well,
It's already there. Half of it, only half.
Hey, Walter,
No, well, okay.
Walter, go ahead.
I think they're having their own conference over there. That's it's a very interesting question, but that's more of a political question than an economic question. I'll be a diplomat here, but I'll take the political.
We'll take that one offline.
I'll take the bait. In terms of the political side of the question, I'm sorry. In terms of the political side of the question, Russia is a very large country geographically. It has many problems ethnically. And over time, one could foresee that there would be some kind of internal mechanism, probably as a result of the pro-democracy movement. Once that takes hold and people start rising, you could see that there'll probably be areas that'll try to break away, want to break away. And so that's an internal dimension that's totally beyond the bailiwick of this conversation. And you go into depth of that. As they move toward democracy, and eventually I think they will move toward democracy, there will be a breakup of the mentality that we see now in terms of authoritarianism. What kind of shape will it take, whether it'll be a geographic breakup or just a political breakup in the sense that people have more freedoms, that's a whole different story. But on the economic side of it, let me not take debate too much on that one, but let me just say this. Look, all kidding aside and everything and all these discussions we have, Ukraine, those of you, and I'm sure everyone in this room follows Ukraine, that is one of the wealthiest countries in the world in terms of natural resources. Think of it, anywhere from a quarter to a third of the best soils in the world are in Ukraine. In Ukraine. In terms, we just recently intellectually, in terms of news and everything, discovered the issue of rare earth metals and critical minerals. Ukraine has had them a long, long time. They have a good percentage of the world's graphite, titanium, etc. These are little known facts. A lot of the food that the UNDP, the UN Development Program gets for Africa, for example, comes from Ukraine. It's the Ukrainian grains that feed a lot of the UN programs. People don't realize this. And in terms of skilled labor, Ukrainians are very, very resourceful. If anything, look at the war situation now. Drone warfare basically was invented by Ukraine. And of course, the Russians reacted, and then the Ukrainians react with a new invention. And so it's a tit for tat all along in this war. But this is the way the war is being run now. This is the future of war, basically, is being developed. And Ukrainians helped invent that. They're light years ahead of most countries in this kind of invention. So in a lot of, if you look at a lot of the technical revolutions around the world, home products that we take for granted, have been invented by Ukrainians. And people don't realize how talented the country is and resourceful, and what a mineral base it has, both in terms of hard minerals like the rare earth minerals and agricultural products. So I have no doubt, in a peaceful environment, Ukraine will prosper. It has to get rid of its corruption and its bureaucracy. And I remember myself when I served as ambassador, some of the things we talked about, because I was. Let me just get into a little bit reminiscing here. Some of the discussions I had with the Ukrainian leadership at the time, was about the future of Ukraine. And, you know, at that time, we were debating the issue of nuclear weapons with Ukraine because Ukraine had the third largest nuclear force. They didn't control the weapons, and so they couldn't launch them, but yet, you know, they still wanted to bargain kind of with them. And I kept telling them, listen, the Soviet Union had a lot of nuclear weapons and it fell apart. Why? Because it didn't offer anything to its people. You have to concentrate on your economic base, build yourself up economically, because if you have a strong economic base, the people will support the country and the country will be strong. So we had this argument going back to 1992 with the Ukrainians, you know, on the nuclear weapons, economic development. And the same thing right now, you can have peace and Ukraine moves into a peaceful era, but if you don't reform your economy and move forward, you're going to get into a morass again. And that's not going to be good for the country. So now is a great opportunity because you have the international community focusing on a reconstruction. You have groups like this Unity Club that's looking at reconstruction of Ukraine. So there are forces outside now that will help the system move forward. And that's why I'm very optimistic about the future of the country.
Okay, we're running overtime, so I'm going to let Walter, one question.
Actually, I was gonna drop my question, though it was along the same lines.
Walter, Mike.
To the mic.
Not the same question as Max. I was gonna drop this question because we really are running out of time, but big question is, are there, and because this introduces what we're doing in the afternoon, are there areas that are so powerful now in terms of defense, in terms of AI? We're going to have the expert on AI, Ukrainian AI, speaking, Dr. Romanko. AI, rare earths, you mentioned, those are all the afternoon sessions and stuff like that. Are there things that are so powerful that in your mind, Ambassador Popadiuk, they will accelerate interest in investing in Ukraine despite these other problems that we're talking about, including the corruption problem? So are they that, well, no, I can't say corruption because that'll always poison things, but go ahead.
Well, that's a very good question. I would say every sector in Ukraine is open because of the devastation that the country has gone through. I wouldn't single out one particular one. One particular one that the Ukrainian government would want to invest in is their defense industry, because right now I think about 40% of their armaments are being produced domestically. They have a very advanced defense industry of their own. They would like to enhance it for obvious reasons. And they've put a lot of effort into the technology in it. As I mentioned about the drone warfare basically being invented in Ukraine, maybe I'm being a little dramatic, but you know, the Ukrainians have had a great impact on the technology and the inventiveness of drone warfare. So I think they would definitely welcome more investment into that. And I think there would be investment coming into that sector because of the advances that Ukrainians have made. And our own companies, US companies, I think would like to associate with that and build on that, quite frankly. So I think that would be a very big draw for a lot of the large corporations, both European and American in that area.
Okay, so that's the last question because we got to get back on track. So thank you, Ambassador. Thank you. That's great words.
Here, let's go. Stein told you. Stein.
Yeah, I will. All right. For our next session, these are the beginning of our afternoon sessions. I am going to ask to the dais. I'm going to ask to the dais Ambassador John Herbst. I've seen him at some point. I think we have. Yeah, I'm going to ask, is Mr. Mendoza on? Yes? Because I just, I'm.
Latest missive. Jock Mendoza has apologized. The power and internet are off, at least in his area of Sophia Street.
Okay. All right, then what we, Grant, I saw Grant here somewhere. I know, I saw Dr. Shatz is here, and I saw Max. Max has been, right. Okay, so then we do have a nice full house. And if we get Jacques back on, yes, okay. So with that, as I've said our biggest supporters have always been our generals and our ambassadors. And that's why I'm the US ambassadors and generals. And I can't think of anyone who could run this particular panel better than Ambassador John Herbst, who, as ambassador, if you remember, you and I worked on putting together the first energy dialogues, US-Ukraine energy dialogues. And so with that, sir, it's all yours. Okay.
Is working. Okay. Welcome to the natural resources, or I should say the critical and rare earth minerals session. Now, we have an excellent panel for you. Unfortunately, we don't have Jock from Kyiv, but he is indisposed because Vladimir Putin is a war criminal. So we can all understand that. And by the way, I don't know if you saw the tweet from retired Admiral James Stavridis showing the strike on the kindergarten in Kharkiv and said, tell me that tomahawks to Russia, which are only going to be used against military and major strategic economic targets, is escalatory. Exactly. Okay. There's a style to these events here, which is we simply let our very distinguished panelists speak. And that's what we'll do. So we'll start at the far end.
Thank you.
Please. And introduce yourself so everyone knows who you are.
Okay. Do I have my slide presentation up? Okay, great. We could just wait for the slide presentation.
I guess we can't see the slide presentation. No,
You could. Is that the panelists can't see the slides.
Okay, well,
No.
it's all good.
just keep that in mind as you walk through them.
Okay. I'll go ahead and kick it off. You know, so,
I found it.
okay. Thank you. So, next slide, please. My name's Max Pyziur. You've probably already heard me recite that a few times. I'm a research director at the Energy Policy Research Foundation. We use the acronym EPRINC and EPRINC.org to refer to ourselves and to refer to our website. We were started in 1944. Our work's focused on the intersection of energy economics, regulatory affairs, and public policy and trade. We work in three realms. We publish policy briefings, give congressional testimony, and speak to other policymakers, and we host events much like this one. Thank you to Walter for inviting me here. I'm a second stringer, so most of my comments, they don't put Ukraine at the focus, only at the very end, but Ukraine is a significant actor in the discussion that I will be presenting here. And greetings to the panelists also. Next slide, please. Sorry, I have it here also in front of me. So we start with U.S. energy dominance. And in July, the Trump administration concluded a non-binding framework agreement for the EU to purchase 700 billion of U.S. energy over the course of 3 years. Shortly afterwards, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen added, we still have too much Russian LNG that is coming in through the back door. We want to absolutely get rid of all Russian fossil fuels and purchase the more affordable and better LNG from the United States. So over the next several slides, I'm going to present comments about this, and the analysis is more expansive than just the EU. It's also to include Turkey and the United Kingdom. So let's start with the case of crude oil. Oh, I'm sorry. Next slide, please. These are the comments that I just read off, but is this too little, too late? The last point here at the bottom. Next slide, please. So the first thing we do is we look at the case of European crude oil imports. We see $9 billion until about 2020, and then there's a decline to 7.5 since then. Through 2022, Russian crude oil imports have ranged from 3 to 4.5. And due to the escalation of the war in 2022, sanction measures in response, now it's 540,000 barrels per day. And if you look at the pane on the right, you see who still the culprits are as far as acquiring Russian crude oil. You see primarily Turkey and a few other countries. In the trailing 12 months through June 2025, the value of U.S. crude oil exports were 101 billion. Of those, 32 billion went to Europe. And if we displace this last portion, that would be another 12 billion. So for a total of 44 billion. So we'll add up all these numbers at the end. The case of petroleum products. Next slide, please. We look at petroleum products. And despite having sizable refining capacity, Europe still requires considerable amounts of product imports. During the 2010s, product imports peaked at 3.5. More recently, they've been at 2.1 million barrels per day from a diversity of sources. But until 2022, Russia was the dominant supplier, at times delivering 58% of the total. But again, same situation. Since 22, what's happened? You see 580,000 barrels, 1,000 barrels per day of Russian product imports. And again, the culprits, same corner of the world: Bulgaria, Poland, Latvia, and Lithuania. Total value of U.S. product exports in the last 4 years has been approximately 114. To Europe, it's $19 billion. Next slide, please. The case of natural gas. Again, are we going backwards? Okay, here we go. Okay, so on the left pane here, you see the drama of first the development of U.S. LNG and then just where it's going. During late, and then on the right side, the shift in imports into Europe. So reading again, with the escalation of Russia's war against Ukraine in 2022 and a series of reciprocating steps, flows of pipeline Russian natural gas to Europe have been severely curtailed. During late 2019, Russian natural gas pipeline through both Ukraine and other countries accounted for almost 60% of European imports. Concurrently, LNG accounted for only 30%. So with the failure to renew a transit agreement, Ukraine stopped pipelining Russian natural gas to Europe. You can see that in the right pane where the sort of the little blue strip at the bottom completely is eliminated. That was Ukraine's, what was transited through Ukraine. During 2025, an average of 1.7 billion cubic feet of Russian national natural gas, less than 10% of Europe's total has been shipped via Turkstream, a system of pipelines running under the Black Sea to Turkey and then further into Europe. The value of U.S. energy imports has climbed. It's currently 21.3. If Europe acquired all of U.S. LNG exports, meaning displacing that last Russian component, a pipeline component, it would rise to 26.2 billion. So if we put it all together, we see, next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry, there was one more slide here. There's still Russian LNG coming in, and this is where it's going. This is from the Arctic. But next slide. So the left pane shows what it looks like, just the size of U.S. energy exports into Europe. This is including Turkey and the UK. And then putting in the context of the signed non-binding agreement that took place in July. So you see the magnitude and how far you still have to go and whether or not it's realistic given some of the numbers that I've presented here. Next slide, please. So we move specifically to petroleum. We see what's happened with petroleum in one of the previous slides, but let's bring Ukraine forward into the discussion. Next slide, please. Okay, so with Ukraine being more aggressive in recent months in attacking Russia's oil infrastructure, the assumption is that we would see more curtailments. So two slides, one a map of the attacks on Russian infrastructure, and then just relatively how more aggressive Ukraine has been. But excuse me, just I want to make sure I don't want to break the discussion here. But there is a trade-off. If refined products don't move, then crude oil takes its place. And what you see here, next slide. And what you see here, especially on this pane right here, if you look towards this left side, if you look towards the very far left of this leftmost slide, you see crude oil exports exceeding refined products. Next slide, please. So all this was cribbed from an outfit called Kepler, which follows the movements of maritime vessels. A swift return of Russian refining capacity anytime soon remains unlikely. Transportation fuel shortages in Russian domestic market are here to stay. So you're going to see more domestic stress in country in Russia. Excuse me. And countries like Brazil and Turkey are looking to diversify their product imports from Russian sources. More importantly, let's look at the global markets. Next slide, please. Oil prices, both benchmarks, US WTI, West Texas Intermediate, and Brent have been declining. An oversupply. You're lost in thought here. The world is being flooded with crude oil. Economies are flattening, but so there's all of this crude oil that's going in out into the market. Take a look at the United States. Next slide, please. You see, U.S. crude production hasn't been curtailed despite declining prices. Next slide, please. What's OPEC doing? Despite a weak market, OPEC Plus is in the process of restoring 2.2 million barrels of cuts that took place in 2023. The bullet points basically show you the steps. We take a look at U.S. crude oil inventories. Next slide. They're not going into U.S. crude oil inventories. This is a traditional season where you would see a build out of U.S. crude oils. So the question is, where are they going? Next slide. China. China is very bad at reporting, and this is a weak slide. This is what you really want to look for, the purple line. This is OPEC, the blue bars, the unwinding of the cuts that took place in 2023. So China's building inventories for both strategic and commercial needs, but it doesn't operate like a normal country, like say the United States or OECD countries. Apologies for the pause. Thank you. Next slide, please. And despite the shortfall in Russian crude oil exports into Europe, you're seeing still sizable crude oil exports elsewhere. And this is, Anders was saying, well, because of the yesterday's sanctions, you're going to see a strong curtailment into Russia and into China and India. That remains to be seen. One comment about this, the scale here dropped to zeros because it says million barrels. If you're seeing 4,000 million barrels, you're way off. It's just totally physically impossible to produce that much crude oil and move it. It's just the 3 zeros. And getting close to wrapping up. Natural gas. Next slide, please. Pipeline, compressor station someplace near the Polish-Ukrainian border. Next slide, please. If we look at inventories, if we look at what's going on in Europe, and if we look at what's going on in Ukraine, this is the most recent data as of Friday. You're seeing the buildup of natural gas inventories below trend. You're seeing it both across the EU, which is the left pane, and you're seeing it both in Ukraine. Ukraine has, in recent times, has been sort of a backstop for the rest of Europe. It has ample capacity. It has 1 trillion cubic feet of storage, which is about 1/4 of what the United States can hold, but it's not being utilized. Next slide, please. Here you see the same data, only framed a little differently. Left pane is drawdowns from inventory and replacements to inventory. So here you see more red. That means more of Ukraine being filled and utilized. You had a very deep winter. That's why you see this huge drawdown, how deep it went and how broad it is. And you've been attempting to refill it. If you look at the other side, you see how deep the trough is, the last trough. That's how severe last winter was. And then where we are right now. Right now, we're at about what Europe would be drawing down for Europe. We don't know how severe the winter's going to be across Europe and Ukraine. So we might be seeing a shortfall. So this is basically just to show the stat. This brings Ukraine more into the picture. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
It's a terrific and comprehensive slideshow. Grant.
I'm sorry.
No, that's terrific.
And if anybody wants a copy, we'll deliver it for free via email to you.
We will go through all the speakers and then we'll take questions from the audience. So Grant, over to you.
Yeah, so my name is Grant Turner. I am with the Stimson Center's Strategic Foresight Hub, but I will primarily be drawing upon something I did at Yorktown Institute with a fellow researcher there named Farrell Gregory, who I'd like to acknowledge his mineral expertise in general. He writes a lot of great stuff out there. I would also like to thank Walter for including me. So despite being referred to as rare earths or a critical mineral deal, it in fact covers basically all of Ukraine's natural resources, its ability to extract them, to process them, and to transport them. Oh, closer. Okay, it sounded so loud in my. And so the issue, though, with rare earths is not that they're hard to find, but rather that they're very difficult to refine. China, as of 2024, was responsible for 69% of the global market's extracted rare earths and refining 92% of them. Like I said, a very costly and expensive process. It requires very massive facilities to achieve. So building them takes quite a while. Regarding Ukraine's rare earth potential, there's still very limited up-to-date studies. Only a few potential significant and accessible deposits appear to exist at the moment. According to the EU, as of 2023, Ukraine was processing around at least two rare earths, namely scandium at 4.3% of global production and gallium at 2.2% of global production at any scale. Further, the S&P Global in February 2025 said that a significant amounts of Ukraine's mineral deposits in general, and I believe rare earths as well, are currently in Russian-controlled territory. So with regards to rare earths, this leaves three questions. What actually exists? Where are they located? And can they become economically viable to extract? At this time, Russia, China, and the US are the only ones that have managed to profitably process significant amounts of rare earth elements. And additionally, if Ukraine were to somehow capture 20% of the global rare earths market, according to Bloomberg in February of this year, that would still only yield around $3 billion per year. So when you get into the larger, so-called critical minerals, but critical materials, raw resources deal, it's important to keep in mind that rare earths really will only play a small part in that. It's good branding, it sounds like, but that can backfire after a certain point. Now, expanding the scope slightly more to critical minerals, it's only a little more promising from a U.S. perspective in terms of U.S. interests. Lithium is one of the main things that could be of value for the U.S. in particular, but that poses similar challenges to extraction because of location and capabilities. It's also notable that the US and Canada are ramping up their mining industries, which are very large. Canada is particularly competitive given its proximity to the US. I will note, however, that there's other critical materials that the US would be interested in. Neon, apparently 90% of that is from 90% of the neon Ukraine produces, or I can't read my own handwriting here, but the point is 90% is used in US semiconductors and chips in the process. So that actually has a kind of underplayed significance, particularly relative to rare earths, as far as what Ukraine can contribute to our technological needs. Now, critical and strategic raw materials. Strategic is a level below the critical, but more expansive concept for the EU. Is of a much greater significance for Europe, and this is demonstrated by the EU and Ukraine's 2021 Memorandum of Understanding on Raw Materials and the 2023 EU Critical Raw Materials Report. As we all know and hear constantly, supply chain resilience requires lots of diversification, but ideally you also want this diversification to be in areas that you can rely on, both in terms of proximity and security. And Ukraine is very notable for a wide variety of raw materials that have been described throughout the day. When it comes to minerals for the EU, notable ones that are just raw extraction is 9% of the EU's titanium ores, 7% of the graphite, and 3% of its manganese. In terms of processed, at least in various stages of processing, that's 19% of the EU's manganese, 2% of titanium, and 2% of gallium. Though it's not a strategic or critical raw material, I would like to also just mention research I did a couple years ago when Bakhmut was still being contested, and the Soledar mines with the salt. So 50% of Europe's chemical production relies on high quality sodium chloride. That involves everything from petroleum to steel, jet fuel, explosives, electricity, water, fertilizers, plastics, car components, the list goes on. It's permeates everything. In 2021, before the war, Ukraine was the second largest supplier of Europe's imports at 11%. Russia was the largest at 16%. Russia has issues with its salt production. There's an article out there that I wrote with detailed statistics you can dive into, and as a result, now India is the largest supplier of salt. So, I don't want to let things that aren't even on the strategic lists yet go without note. Moving on some, where Ukraine could have an edge, particularly in Europe, there are several things going for it. First of all, there's a lot of energy costs that go into extracting and refining, whether that's rare earth elements or all these other materials. And so the energy that Ukraine has available to it, the diverse sources of energy at that, will actually make it rather competitive. Additionally, there's, as was alluded to earlier, opportunities for new facilities to be built that will not only be more efficient, but also more compliant with modern regulations that companies either have to pursue or would like to pursue because of public relations imagery. And so that will actually probably help them significantly, again, be more competitive relative to other shall we say, less clean options around the world. Then there's the fact, or the question of profitability. Before, it had been generally viewed as unprofitable or not, practical to extract a lot of these things or process them. But because of the rising competition and costs and instability around the world, there was at least some McKinsey panelists at the European Business Association's Mining Day in September that made the argument that it is in fact becoming profitable, and then the next 5 to 10 years will be rather crucial in terms of the ability to invest in and start getting your money's worth out of it. How am I doing on time, by the way?
Got about 3 minutes.
All right, so perfect to get to my key points section here. Well, I will just briefly say, so, Europe sees these challenges of relying on the US, Russia, and China for rare earths, energy, et cetera. So, it does need things that are closer and more reliable. The US deal itself is still being hammered out, but it's sounding rather flexible and promising in terms of how the investments can be structured and go towards all sorts of development aspects, not just simply extracting and processing raw materials. And also emphasizing the human capital Ukraine has available is very important. So some of the key takeaways, I would say, US and European investments are more so in Ukraine's long-term sovereignty, as others have mentioned. But it is worth noting again, it falls short of a security guarantee. There's questions of US reliability. What happens if Russia is like, well, we can take that territory, make a deal with you, you can still get your business interests protected, et cetera. These investments take time. Will we have the patience for that? Will diversification make it less attractive? Market shifts make things less practical, et cetera. So there are concerns in those realms. Also, ideally, Europe, of which Ukraine is a part, must more aggressively invest in their collective comprehensive defense, looking towards the Baltic and Scandinavian comprehensive defense models. As part of this integration effort, if the EU is serious about integrating Ukraine before 2030 and bolstering its eastern flank and diversifying its global trade, then it should really look into other additional investment avenues, such as the 3Cs initiative, and expanding that so that the 3Cs initiative can go to include non-EU members more effectively and range from the Barents to the Baltic, the Black, Adriatic, Arabian, and Caspian seas. This will allow the US and Europe to remain competitive in both heartlands. Sub-Saharan Africa is the second less discussed heartland of Mackinder, as well as the rimlands, which were emphasized by Speakman, and thus allow the US and Europe to rebalance their security commitments and priorities. And that's it. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Howard, over to you.
Great. Thanks a lot. And boy, it's a real privilege to be here once again. I'm going to build on what my preceding speakers, Max and Grant, said. So there'll be some duplication, something new. I hope. I would just say, as a preliminary, not really on topic, from the last talk regarding the Russian sovereign assets, European Council is meeting today, and they're supposed to come up with some decision. So I have been trying to check the internet. I haven't really seen anything yet, but hopefully there will be something positive on rechanneling those assets into Ukraine. No, so I'm an economist. I'm at RAND. I've been working on Ukraine issues for quite a while. Report on reconstruction. Most recently, a week ago at 3 a.m., I gave a talk to a conference in Ukraine at Kharkiv University. So there is still a lot of life going on there. And as an economist, I mean, I'm always against saying, well, we need to pick a winning sector. We need to focus on this sector or that sector. We'd prefer to see an overall positive economic environment and let the private sector pick what they do. But natural resources has always been a priority sector. In the previous administration, when Penny Pritzker was special representative for Ukraine's economic recovery, natural resources was one of 6 sectors, and it's been a priority for the Ukrainian government too. There's good reason for that. So I'm going to start with what everyone else has started with, which is the minerals deal. When it first was broached, there was a lot of criticism of it, saying, "Oh, it's rare earths. There's not much rare earths there," as Grant said, but it's actually much more comprehensive, and it's shaping up to be something that could be potentially very substantial. It's looking at how to attract private capital for extraction, processing, creating production chains, and basically using the fund to be a market maker to attract private investment in a broad range of resources. And the resource that's not mentioned frequently, but thanks to Max is now top of the agenda in our panel, is natural gas. In fact, that's a priority now for the fund. And I'll come back to natural gas. So we've had a $75 million injection from the U.S. Development Finance Corporation, $75 million injection from Ukraine. $150 million doesn't seem like a lot relative to Ukraine's needs. But if you think back to 1989, 1991, with the enterprise funds that the U.S. started, capitalized at very low levels, ended up attracting a lot more investment and creating a lot of interest in reforming economies. So we start with the minerals deal and the recovery fund that it really is putting money into. And we should see the plan is to have the first large scale projects, 3 of them in 2026. The other aspect about this deal, which is very promising, is that US contributions of weapons will count as equity injections into the fund. And so in some ways that gives a political cover to the administration to say, we're not actually just giving weapons to Ukraine, we're getting something in return. We're getting an equity injection into this fund. So those are the aspects I look at. As I said, I'll return to energy, all right? And here natural gas seems to be the big play. Ukraine has the second largest gas reserves in Europe behind Norway. 90% of that production is in the Dnipro-Donetsk region, which is not very favorable from a security standpoint, but it is, that's the situation. And Ukraine also has gas storage. So this is really quite beneficial to Europe in terms of increasing gas supplies for Europe, increasing gas storage for Europe, which is what Ukraine has done, does now and does in the past. All right, so that's the energy aspect of it. Let's move, again, as Grant pointed out, right, we're looking at a comprehensive situation and many resources. Let's look to mining and metals. So why is this important to Ukraine? Before the war, mining and metals constituted 10% of GDP, 33% of exports. And it's unfortunate we don't have Jock here. A big part of that was steel. Even today, the big 6 steel giants in Ukraine are responsible for 17% of consolidated budget revenue in Ukraine, and their production is far below what it was in 2021. So Ukraine has been a very favorable site for resources in general. I'd say as an aside, not resource directly, and I feel confident that Jock would talk about this. If we talk about resources, we also have to talk about trade routes and the Black Sea corridor. And Odessa is sometimes not given the importance that it really deserves. That port needs to stay open and active for Ukraine's economic well-being. Anyway, so that's steel. All right. Staying with mining and metals and resources in general, the problem is we don't know exactly where they are. And so there are steps being taken. And those steps right now are digitizing all of Ukraine's paper-based geologic data. This is the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development is funding this. So there's really a multinational effort to help Ukraine in this area. Let's go to critical minerals, right? I'm not going to talk about, are they economically viable? We've covered that already. What I would say is, in terms of all minerals and resources, Ukraine could be important. And the question is how to take advantage of that. The Europeans estimate that Ukraine has 25 of 34 different resources that are essential to the EU economy. If you look at the US, there's a different ratio. It's 20 of 50 that are relevant. And it's not just critical minerals, it's ferroalloys for steel, non-ferrous metals for construction. This, if it's developed, will not only benefit Ukraine's reconstruction, but I think benefit the EU as well, Europe. So when we think about natural resources and minerals in Ukraine, it's really kind of triple-hatted. One is, how much does it help Ukraine? It does. How much does it help the EU? It does. It makes Ukraine much more valuable to the EU, and then it contributes to global markets as well and helps stabilize those. We mentioned the different types of minerals that Ukraine has, and it's good to connect those to technology. So minerals by themselves, resources by themselves are worth zero. right? They're only worth something if we can take them out of the ground and if they can be used for production. So if we zero in on what are these minerals for, when we talk about Ukrainian lithium and graphite, that goes into batteries. That's essential to batteries. Again, very helpful to the West, very helpful to Europe. If we talk about rare earths, that's essential to defense sector and semiconductors technology. So again, important for Ukraine, but important for Europe, important for the United States. I'll conclude. I think I'll probably be under time, which is good, more room for questions. I'll conclude with two thoughts. One is, and I repeat this because it is very important. We don't know the extent to which the resources deal and the fund will contribute to security. And so I think that's something to watch and to stay on top of and to encourage. The other issue is, and I think Ukraine, which has very good economists, very good engineers, very good technologists, Ukraine to truly benefit from the natural resources that it has, wants to capture the processing part of the value chain and the use part. So if we're making batteries or technology items, right, the real benefit is if that's done in Ukraine. And so that then leads to what kind of peace do we have, as was raised before.
Howard, that was terrific as always. Could I take the prerogative of the chair just to make a few short comments on the presentations, and then we'll open up to audience questions. First, the deal on natural resources, which has been billed as a critical minerals and rare earth minerals deal, was absolutely essential to stabilizing the U.S.-Ukrainian relationship at a perilous moment. We all know about the February 28 Oval Office meeting. We know that about 10 days before that, 12 days before that, Secretary of the Treasury Bessent went to Ukraine to offer the first version of a critical minerals deal, which I call the Belgian Congo version. Really? And that after the Ukrainians properly dismissed it, it took about 4 weeks to reach a basic deal. And so that was negotiated literally in the days that immediately followed that Oval Office meeting. And that set the stage for the recovery of the bilateral relationship, which would have happened anyway, but it came faster because of it. And you can credit both presidents for this, and I'll explain why. Critical minerals and rare earths are something that we have neglected literally for decades, and the Chinese have cleaned our clocks in this area. And they are not our friend, as you know. Biden sort of got this, but he moved in a deliberate way. What you need is an aggressive or a speedy way. And Trump has clamped onto this. And I credit Zelensky because he took the advice of some people when he met with Trump in September of 2024. In other words, 7 or so weeks before our presidential elections, and made a presentation on how this is an area where the United States and Ukraine could cooperate, and Trump went for it. Although there were some tensions around that visit, which we don't need to recall right now. The administration is dead serious about this. And I can tell you, and I think this was mentioned by some of our panelists, the DFC is all in. They showed up in a large way at the Reconstruction Conference in Rome this past summer. And having gone to 2 of them, I can tell you those conferences are largely a waste of time. The big stage events are things that have been already agreed upon and then presented there. The side conversations can be useful, but that's where I had a chance to chat with the large DFC team, and they're pushing this. Commerce Department's all in. So the administration is seriously focusing on it. So that's one. 2, and I imagine Grant and Howard may have better information than I'm about to provide you, but I'll throw it out there anyway. I'm not an economist, and I spend more time worrying about weapons than rare earths, but I do spend a fair amount of time on the minerals. And my understanding, well, first, the data on this is essentially Soviet data. And they're cataloging what they've got, but what's really needed is surveys using the most advanced technology to look at this. Point one. Point two, the estimates for the value of Ukrainian minerals range from 12 to 30 trillion. That's a very large gap. And the estimates as to how much of that is under Kiev's control as opposed to Moscow's is 1/3 to 2/3. In other words, it could be 1/3 one side, 2/3 the other, but it's not clear which side has the greater amount. So again, there's a lot of uncertainty there, but also a lot of interest. And this can be built on. All right. One other point I wanted to make, I'm not an economist again, and I'm sure Howard spends more time on the Russian frozen state assets. But I've done some work in this field because I've been, you might say, providing a platform for people pushing for the strongest grasp at that money to pass on to Ukraine. And here's my understanding. There's meetings right now in the EU. I have very low expectations for that meeting. There's no question that starting in late February, March, as the Europeans got extremely nervous about where the US was heading on things Ukrainian, they stepped up on weapons, they stepped up on aid to Ukraine, they stepped up on troops going to Ukraine, and they began to step up on this. And Philip Zelikow, a guy who's done terrific work on this, which I've helped amplify in Ukraine, always made the argument the Europeans would only get serious about the frozen assets when they decided that maybe their taxpayers did not want to give even more aid to Ukraine. And that's kind of how this is playing out. Anyway, my understanding from talking to some very, very well-informed people, at least two of them well known to this audience, but I will not say who, that there's still too much green eye shade thinking about this. And while we've heard some very encouraging statements from Macron and Merz, for example, they have not somehow instructed their finance ministers to act on those statements. So the natural caution in the financial community, people who don't think about geopolitics, people who don't understand that if Russia wins in Ukraine and comes crashing further into Europe, the institutions that have run beautifully for 60 or 70 years, IMF, World Bank, et cetera, go kaput because the new guys in charge of global order don't like those institutions. So only when the politicians tell the finance ministers to do it will it happen. So I expect no serious progress on this calendar year, but in the months that follow in the new year, we may well get the job done. It would be great if Secretary Bessent was unleashed. I think he gets this. I think he's understood the danger to his part of the world, meaning the financial world, posed by Putin's aggressive policies. But he can go no farther than he thinks his president will let him. And we saw the good side of that 24 hours ago. I'd like to see more of that good side because I know it's there. But that's not a prediction. But if what we saw yesterday is a signal of things to come, and I'm a 51%er on that. Meaning I think it's more likely to happen than not, but I'm not overly confident, which is why, unlike many of my peers, I've not been pessimistic on Trump and his policies towards the war in Ukraine. But if we see more, we will probably see American putting its shoulder into this. Now, obviously, we only have like 5 to 10 billion of the frozen Russian assets. But if A, we were to act on that to encourage the others, and B, use our vast influence to encourage the others to do the right thing, that would help. Okay, I've spoken long enough. It's now your chance. Questions? Right there. And please identify yourself and speak loudly unless you have a microphone.
And the question is that you mentioned that Russian crude oil exports are higher now going out. Is that correct?
They continue, and their destinations, as the slide showed, it was from Standard & Poor's Platts that I cribbed it, 3.5 to 4 million barrels per day.
My question is, from what I understand, they use ghost ships where they do also open ocean transfers,
Shadow Fleet, yes.
shadow fleet. Before I guess to India for refinement. Is that true? Or
It goes wherever.
Wherever.
It goes to China, goes to, India has the largest refinery on the West Coast near Mumbai.
but my question is, can those ships be interdicted and that oil confiscated or impounded based on the sanctions, or is that against maritime law?
My colleague who knows this better, he stepped out. I was explaining to Yaroslav Martinyuk, there's a notion of innocent passage. So innocent passage through the Danish Straits. So if you have a tanker flagged with Sierra Leone or whatever other nation, Panama, the assumption is innocent until proven guilty. But what powers do you have to actually confiscate the vessel or sanction the vessel? I'm not very strong in that legal
Yeah, 'cause
understanding.
I would assume we have satellite images of vessels leaving ports in that general area. So I would think that they could identify a ship.
Well, sure. I'm sure they can identify the ships. I mean, it's Kepler data. Kepler's fantastic as far as identifying the data and how you acquire the ships. Well, they go to be scrapped as they're traveling across the Indian Ocean on the way to the west coast of India. Yeah, I've heard stories, and how this happens. But Matthew, my colleague Matthew, might be able to answer your question as far as, do you have any just idle thoughts about the right of innocent passage and what you can share? The gentleman was asking about interdicting tankers, vessels.
Yeah, so we were talking about this for a little bit. We were engaged in a project that was looking into doing this, and there were a lot of legal issues, if I remember correctly. And there were some arguments that maybe there was a possibility to do this, especially using environmental law, because we were particularly looking at tankers and the fact that these tankers were not well insured. This is how the Russians were getting around a lot of the oil sanctions, which were operating on the level of insurance companies, and that there being intense environmental risks for if something broke, and that to compensate that, perhaps you could do something where you charge a fee per the damage, the potential environmental damage. It might have worked. It's a little bit unclear. I was talking to some environmental lawyers about it. In general, it's just a very serious legal issue, and people really don't like to violate the Principles of the Monroe Convention, which has been around for a very long time. The conventions about the Bosphorus and the Dardanelles and the Straits in Denmark, and then also just in the law of the sea treaty these days, there's also the right of innocent passage. And so you have this whole legal architecture that's built up around these ideas, and so it requires there's a lot of energy that needs to be the case to carve out exceptions for that. And so potentially there's paths, but the paths need to be walked very carefully and tread very narrowly.
The motivation for this was that we were exchanging emails with the Yermak-McFall Commission in the hopes of impressing the Zelensky presidential administration as to how to act. The problem there is it's a one-way street. We got as far as the members of the Yermak-McFall Commission, but when Zelensky and Yermak want something done, they approach this commission, but information doesn't travel into the presidential administration. So that was the motivation for all of this.
It only travels in via certain channels.
I think, and Matthew is integral into to doing this particular research.
Walter.
You got a question over here?
Of course, we're underneath there. It's going to scold me. Yes, in addition to Bogdan, my colleague Bogdan's question is, now we just had harder sanction passed. Could we actually, what do you think the feasibility is to write sanctions to what Bogdan asked about, to stop these shadow fleets from delivering the oil? Is it going to be from environmental law or just like a business financial sanction law?
So I know that at least I have not looked at the new sanctions in much detail. I was very encouraged by what was said this morning about the potential drop in Indian and Chinese purchases of Russian oil. What I will say is that for the Biden sanctions, when that price cap apparatus came on, there was also a significant drop immediately in the purchase of Russian oil, and then it crept back up over time. And so this is kind of, so again, not having looked at them in detail yet, which is something I definitely want to do. And maybe the case that even if we do see an immediate drop off that's pretty severe, we have to be careful that's persistent over a long period of time.
I do have a question, and it's deals with certain aspects of what is known as resources that used to be there. I'm looking at something like sebacic acid over in Severodonetsk, and the ability of the sterol group in the old days, large chemical resources. I'm looking at rather than rare earths, I'm looking at titanium, which sort of falls because it's not really, the standard, iron, steel kind of thing. And in general, even things in your field, in the energy field, Herbst, you remember the Halliburtons coming in with coal methane and so on and so forth, coal bed methane. What has happened to some of that? Because I know Ukraine was a leader in a lot of that. Has that sort of, the chemicals industry, has that fallen by the wayside? The more exotic energy sources, has that gone by the wayside? Just as general, sebacic acid was a fire retardant in every piece of material that you made. And China and Russia and Ukraine have had some of the largest. Has that disappeared, or should we even bring it back if it's disappeared? That's the question I have.
I'm not the word answer. I'm sorry. I'm negligent in my study of what's going on.
No. I forgot. I realized because yes, you guys are on the contemporary stuff. So
I'll give you a half answer, and I'll give
Okay.
you a stereotypical economist answer to the second part of your question,
Right.
which is, should we bring it back? Right? If someone wants to risk their capital to bring it back, yeah.
Got it.
I don't know, right? This let the market work that system. And I think that actually, to link it a little bit to what's been said, I think John's point about the surveys is exactly right. If chemicals will benefit from domestic inputs, right? We have so much better technology for prospecting and for establishing reserves today that, where oil fields might have been two-dimensional imaging 50 years ago, we do 3D, we do all kinds of different things. And so besides digitizing the resource maps, a full-scale survey of resources are there. We might find that the chemical industry is not only viable, but this is the perfect place for it. And then the question is, what would bring in private investment? And there is where we might have some public contribution, something from the recovery fund or from other sources to jumpstart that.
Do you have any idea how much that might cost?
Yeah, I was about to ask titanium, for instance, if Jacques had been here, if Jacques had been here, he might have talked about. I know that SCM not only was in metals, but it was in titanium at some point.
Yeah.
And so I was just wondering what's happened. We know that the steel has dropped. We heard that agriculture is at 40. That's dropped down to 20. It used to be 40. But what has happened to titanium? And in other words, the stuff that is full, and it's not Europe. We didn't ask you for that, but I was hoping that someone might just realize, that there was other stuff going on.
Titanium is on the list. When you look at like the reports about resources in Ukraine,
right?
Titanium is near the top. So,
yes,
so that's certainly a potential.
Right.
And I don't have an answer to the specific question, but I think building a little bit on what he was talking about, there's a question of to what extent and in what form there should be industrial policy guiding
right.
a lot of these
that's why I'm
efforts.
asking.
Yeah,
that's why
yeah,
I'm asking.
I didn't know if you had anything to add to that. I was curious, but it's all good.
Okay, thank you.
So that's a good point. I agree with him.
To get us back on schedule, we've got 5 minutes left if there are questions.
Blank question. Would that help?
Woloska.
Online content creator from Germany who's been watching us.
Yeah, hello. Is everybody hearing me?
Yes, we are.
Oh, great.
Yeah, great. This is Christoph Müller from Germany. I have a podcast called Talk for Ukraine, and I'm very concerned about the situation here in Europe, and about the lack of knowledge of everything. And it's kind of corresponding also to the confusing situation in the US. And it's great, your panel, what you are doing there. And yeah, I would just ask my specific question on all those resources, the great resources of talent and of materials you just mentioned, and also about the craziness in Europe that we still import Russian energy, and this is the only way to shut down those things, as we see, is the strikes of the Ukrainians on the Russian energy infrastructure. So just cut them down from the money supply, because money is key for the Russians to make their war. And so my question: how would you convince the leaders, the European leaders, to give Ukraine everything what they need, weapon-wise? Because we obviously are not willing to close down our imports of Russian energy, as we see in the case of Hungary and Turkey. Turkey, of course, we can forget. We have also seen they do what they want. But Hungary, they are also importing, and we saw also on the panel on this graph that Netherlands and Spain, they also import still the natural gas and the liquefied gas, as I remember. And so this is just key is how can we support Ukraine with weapons, and how can we change the will of political leaders in Europe and also in the US. But the Trump administration, for me, is it's kind of ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous what they do. And so for the moment, let's forget Americans, despite you in the room there. It's great to see you. I'm very happy. But also, but when I saw this video of Donald Trump with pooping on the, this was just horrible. So just forget about the American administration a moment. So how can we focus on the Europeans, that they wake up, and that it is very important now to shut down the Russian energy supply and give Ukraine all the weapons they need? Who can answer this question? Sorry.
Okay, there's something unusual for someone in Germany asking a room full largely of Americans, what should we do to move Europe in the right direction?
Oh yeah, I was afraid that you would reply that way. Yeah.
But I will rush in where wise men fear to tread. Look, first, regarding the situation here, it's a roller coaster. It's an absolute roller coaster. So the good turn we see today is followed by a not so good turn tomorrow, which is followed by another good turn.
Yes.
But if you look at the overall pattern of Trump administration policymaking, it's moving in the right direction. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean it will stay moving in the right direction, but it has been moving in the right direction since the middle of March, with ups and downs. And the serious sanctions that he imposed yesterday, the first time he's really made Putin pay a price for continuing the war, may, I'm not saying will, but may be a foreshadowing of more to come. But before that, there'll be some bad things for sure. That's point one. Point two, I've already made this, I already said something along these lines. I'll say it a little bit more right now. Europe has taken a lot of very good steps as it grew worried about the American commitment to stopping Putin in Ukraine. And on the economic side, there have been major reduction in European purchases, excuse me, of Russian oil and gas. And the Europeans have been much stauncher on sanctions than the Trump administration has been. And it's been stauncher on providing economic aid than the Trump administration. And it's willing to purchase American weapons for Ukraine. All incredible things, besides, in a NATO context, increasing their own defense expenditures. All of this is good. And while it's not wonderful, and the American role is not wonderful, things ain't wonderful in Russia either. And the West may be doing enough to make sure Putin does not win. I say may, I'm not saying is definitely doing enough. But yes, more can be done. It's odd that even when, as Trump was hesitating to put any pressure on Moscow, he was encouraging the Europeans to stop purchasing any oil or gas from Russia. I'm not sure that was the best look. How persuasive is that when you're not doing much and telling people to do a lot? But it's still not a bad thing. So obviously you're on the right side of this issue. You understand the stakes. I dare say everyone in this room understands the stakes. And it's not just for Ukraine to avoid a truly catastrophic near-term future. It's also European interests and American interests, because Putin's aggressive designs go well beyond Ukraine. And that's the point we need to continue to make. And just to give you one little reason for sunshine, I don't want to overwhelm you with good news because it's really not out there. The American public firmly understands that Putin's an aggressor, that Russia is an American adversary, that Trump is being played by Putin, and that we should be giving at least as much aid to the Ukrainians as we gave under Biden. A poll showed that like 3 months ago. And in fact, it showed 69% said we should be giving at least as much, if not more. And that split was 2/3 in favor of giving more than Biden gave. And while that has not had an impact on Trump's policy to date, over time it could. And with that, I think we're actually 3 minutes.
Ambassador?
Yes, please.
Can I just,
2 minutes.
the gentleman asked what can be done. You had an incursion of drones over Polish territory, I think was 17 or 19. And there's a lot of hand wringing, and you have a conference on how do we deter Russia from doing this. There was a Russian fighter jet that flew for 17 seconds over the territory of Turkey. There was no flinching there. It was taken down.
Yes.
So, I mean, that's my answer to this gentleman here.
You're absolutely right about that. The Russians are right now deciding that, well, NATO's not so tough because they were getting away with all this stuff. It's not just drones. It was a MiG in Estonian airspace for like 13 minutes. Okay. Thank you all very much.
Yeah. Thank you very much. That was a wonderful panel. That was
Yeah, we do a.
even with
some courses have
major.
I've been saying,
We also have a good access.
his instincts are, but his interests, including his political interests.
Are we ready? Yes. Okay, so I decided that even though we're almost on time, I'm not going to give a coffee break. I promised to give everybody a coffee break. Yeah.
Walter,
Yes.
I want to talk to you about three-season initiative, but you should spin off on what he said, three-season initiative. You're gonna
That
have,
is, and I'm gonna grab it.
But I want to talk to you.
Brad, that was one.
Sure.
Thank you again. Thank you so much.
And I actually was interested in cover.
So let's step up.
Wondering whether in covering, whether those things that like, that are not quite as available as regular metals, including titanium. What you might have known, because there were, we certainly had deposits. I know that Mendoza's, Akhmetov people, man, had it, and then sort of lost it, and I was wondering where that stands.
Yeah, I'm not sure immediately where it stands. I forget which year the EU was still getting, I think it was 7% or somewhere around
Yeah, they
there.
were.
Yeah.
They were getting a pretty large.
And I think they could get a lot more. So,
Yes, that's what I heard from John.
so yeah.
No, and I, thank you very much, man.
Thank you so much.
Дякую, раз, все. I promised to give everybody a coffee break after the next panel. So let's get this panel under control because this one is really going to be interesting because it combines all of that cutting edge stuff that may in fact make money for Ukraine. So I would ask everybody to basically, if you can, or go out there 1 second and get the coffee. No, if I do that, nobody will come back. So I would actually let you sit down and maybe individually, whoever needs his coffee can do it, but not as a group. We have everyone here. Andriy, the big question is our friend Honchar, is he on? And he managed to make it, though Malivanov and Mendoza. Oh, he is. Okay, that's wonderful. That means we have a full house. Very, very good. This is a very important panel for all of us because this is the panel. Wonderful. Дякую, дякую, друже міністр. So, Herman.
So we have 4 people now?
Yeah, we have the whole full list. The list is, we have 3 panelists and 1 discussant. Yes, okay. We're on. Can we sit down, folks? All right, thank you. We're calling this session into order, okay? All right, Herman?
Thank you, Robert. It's always a pleasure to be here, and I think we've been at every one since the beginning. And one thing all these conferences have in common is no matter how much you know about Ukraine coming in, if you listen to all the panels, you'll learn additional things. And that's welcome to all of us that care about the issues. The topic today is cutting-edge technology. You know, big changes in how people think come through generations, but how they live, the big changes come through technology. And people had lived the same for hundreds of years, but in the last 150 years, technological advances, which increase more rapidly with every decade, have affected very much the way we live normal lives and the way we live life in war. I think about from my own experience, my father growing up in a small mountain village in Austria, and the big event of the year was an automobile coming into town. And you think about how that has changed. Now we're having automobiles that will fly soon. I think about aircraft that were biplanes, and now we're sending people to the moon. I think about in medicine how heart conditions and cancer were death sentences with people dying at such a young age, and now not so much. And of course, in war, you had a Polish cavalry charging tanks. Now tanks no longer count because of Ukrainian technology in warfare with drones. So to discuss these technologies, how they may affect us in our lives, and how they can be brought to market. You can have a good invention, for instance, in medicine, but how long before you can bring it to the average person? So we have a great distinguished panel, and I'm going to follow Ambassador Herbst's lead and let them introduce themselves. All of you can read what's written in the program, but individual panelists may want to highlight something about themselves or say something that's not in the program. And we'll begin with Oleksandr.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you, Walter, for inviting me. My name is Oleksandr Romanko. I'm Ukrainian-Canadian, representing Ukrainian-Canadian Congress. You know, in Canada, because it's called, we like shorter acronyms. So in the US, it's UCCA. In Canada, it's UCC, Ukrainian-Canadian Congress. And being the Ukrainian-Canadian let me basically add a spoon of maple syrup to the clam chowder and to borscht. Yeah. So I actually do AI my whole life. I came to Canada from Ukraine 20 years ago to do my PhD in what we now call AI. In the past, we called it operations research, data science. Basically, unfortunately, I was not a PhD student of Yevhenii Honchar, who is known as the godfather of AI. He is professor emeritus at the University of Toronto and got the Nobel Prize last year. Otherwise, I would not be here. I would be probably trying to fire Sam Altman, CEO of OpenAI, instead of being on this panel. I'm referring to one of the PhD students of Yevhenii Honchar, who is Ilya Suchkever, who is really tried to fire Sam Altman, but lost and now has his multi-billion-dollar startup. So after completing my PhD, I worked in the, I still work in the corporate sector. I worked for IBM for 8 years, now working for SNC Technologies Canada, actually developing AI algorithms for finance. So now we're working on developing AI agents that help to make financial decisions. And before I'll go to talk about the Ukrainian AI ecosystem, let me first maybe define what is AI. So in simple words, those are the algorithms that help us to make decisions. And so far we have two areas of success of AI algorithms. So first area where AI algorithms are learning from examples, known as machine learning, is basically computer vision, which is very successful, and natural language processing. Natural language processing, of course, includes large language models and generative AI. Second type where AI is not successful yet is uncertainty modeling. So when we have problems with high level of uncertainty, like making strategic decisions, or modeling financial markets and climate, or planning military operations, humans are not successful and AI is not successful, at least not yet. But of course, these days, most of the buzz is about generative AI, large language models like ChatGPT. But in principle, there are many, many other AI algorithms, such as optimization, Monte Carlo simulations, machine learning, graph network algorithms that are really powering modern businesses and actually powering defense tech. So as a result, I would like to talk about 3 sectors of application of AI in Ukraine, and from my personal involvements, where basically I was involved, and my team was involved from our personal experience, basically working within the Ukrainian ecosystem for the last 12 years. So in these 3 pillars is AI in education and human capital, second, AI in business, and third, AI in defense. So basically, so what we did, starting from 2013, my team and I, we were teaching 2-day courses on AI in Ukraine. At that time, we got support from IBM Ukraine and IBM Canada, basically trying to allow young people to enter into AI field. Actually, the largest course that we had 9 years ago was more than 1,000 attendees. And you imagine it's like 1,000 people on the grounds of Kyiv Polytechnic. So I am jumping on stage for 2 days. People are networking, drinking coffee, like more than 10 kilograms of coffee, more than 100 kilograms of cookies. And these type of events we were doing pretty much for 8 years. These different companies, IBM, Data Science UA, and that's basically was our contribution to building the AI ecosystem in Ukraine. After that, I started to be introduced to Ukrainian universities. So many Ukrainian universities are now having AI centers of research, starting from Ukrainian Catholic University, which is a surprise. Well, I would call it a miracle in these terms. So when we opened the Master of Data Science program at Ukrainian Catholic University, I'm still teaching there 10 years ago. Now it's the best data science and technical AI program in Ukraine. Kyiv School of Economics, Timofey Milovanov was here. So now has bachelor program in AI, and we had a master program in a Master of Business and Management in AI that we unfortunately had to shut down during COVID. I'm also a founding director of the Master of AI in Business program at American University Kyiv, which is a great partnership with Arizona State University. And that's basically our contribution as well. And you know, at our master program at American University Kyiv, we use AI for the curriculum design. So if you think about it, we would like to teach our students skills that are in demand on the job market. And if you look at those, basically, how can we determine those? So what we do, we analyze job postings, extract skills that are mentioned in those online job postings, and try to do clustering of those. And basically the idea, we would like to teach those skills that are mentioned in the job postings together. We would like to teach together in the same course. So we use AI for curriculum design. So it's essentially AI for AI program. And that was a very interesting journey. We are still developing this master program. We had already the first cohort of graduates. Now it's the third cohort has started. And that's all during the war. So, and one probably other message about the education before I move to the other fields is we have a dream, which I would like to share. We would like to attract University of Toronto, which is in the top 10 universities worldwide when you talk about AI, to open a center in Ukraine. That's a dream, which probably we're advocating for it for more than 3 years. And it would be great to have this type of university put in its stamp that it believes in Ukraine to attract investment, innovation, and basically it's not that much about education. It's about joint research. It's about student exchanges, and it's about internships. Very, very important thing. So we are actually running an internship program called MITEX, a Canadian research internship program with Ukraine. And in these 7 years, we had more than 1,000 Ukrainian interns who did research internships at Canadian companies and Canadian universities. So one of my messages to you, think if you can attract potentially MIT, Stanford, Columbia to open a center in Ukraine, which is centered around AI or a tech. My second pillar is AI business ecosystem in Ukraine. So companies like Data Science UA, they opening AI R&D centers in Ukraine for international companies. EPAM and SoftServe, outsourcing companies, basically have teams of more than 100 people who are working on AI research and implementation for their own clients. Ajax, basically the company that produce hardware and software for security, very, very active in AI field. If you look at investments like Horizon Capital, the largest US private equity fund in Ukraine, this amazing work that Lena Kosharna is doing as a CEO, they invest in AI companies in Ukraine. So for instance, they invest in Preply, which is their edtech startup using AI to develop the language courses. Or recently, Ukraine Moldova American Enterprise Fund invested in Monobank, which is also related to AI. Within the Ministry of Digital Transformation of Ukraine, we have the AI Advising Committee. I'm part of it as well. And basically, we're working with Ministry of Digital Transformation. We also now have the AI Center of Excellence within the ministry. So we're working on with our support, we're working on the National Large Language Model. We're working on the AI for D application. And we actually have special taxation regimes for technology companies, including AI companies such as DSCT or Defense City. And my last pillar, because I know my time is limited, and thank you for showing me the reminders, is AI in defense and dual use, which is probably the most important of all these 3 pillars that I talked about. And if we talk about AI in defense, so I would also just talk about 2 topics. AI for robotic systems. Robotic system includes, of course, drones, sea drones, and ground robotic vehicles, plus, of course, swarms of drones, and AI for decision-making support, which is pretty much simulation modeling of battlefield operations, which is known as war games. But these days, it's not only about simulation modeling of battlefield operations, it's simulation modeling of operations of drones and swarms of drones that basically powered by AI and in a coordinated manner they strike. That type of stuff is sitting on the top of the situation awareness system. And Ukraine has Delta, which is one of the best military situation awareness systems in the world. So coming back to these war games and simulation modeling. So historically, it has been developed in the US, Canada, UK since the Second World War, but Ukraine is doing its steps, especially by operating drones. Now, for the drones themselves, AI powering drones. If you look at the FPV drones, which are pretty much priced at $500 a piece, now basically Ukrainians are producing. You put $100 additional device, $50 controller plus $50 AI software, that turns your FPV drone, like now instead of $500, $600, into pretty much last mile kamikaze drone. When it automatically flies the last mile, as soon as the operator points to a target at a distance up to a kilometer, this FPV drones automatically flies and hit the target. So for instance, one of the startups in that field is called the Force Law, founded by Yaroslav Vazhnuk, who is the former co-founder of the PetsCube and now developing his ecosystem of defense tech startups. If we talk about the deep strike drones instead of FPV drones, you put their NVIDIA Jetson Orin Nano hardware accelerator, $250, and you have full autonomy over there. So pretty much what I expect within a year or two, we'll have full autonomy of the drones, where basically it flies automatically, it patrols an area, it identifies automatically targets, and it strikes a high priority target. I know that there are some moral and ethical aspects there, but basically what is now called the kill zone, within pretty much 20 to 50 kilometers, there are no civilians. It's just everything that moves is a legitimate Russian target, pretty much. So that simplifies those types of algorithms, because otherwise we need to take many guardrails into account. So just again, one more minute. So in Canada, as a chair of Innovation, Education Science Committee of Ukrainian Canadian Congress, we are developing these type of collaborations with Ukraine. And just that would be my last point. So we are trying to build and facilitate connections between Canadian companies, Ukrainian companies, to basically do three things that we always hammer to Canadian politicians: co-innovate, co-develop, co-produce between Canada and Ukraine, or US and Ukraine, or European countries and Ukraine. And as a part of our advocacy campaign that we are running for the last 4 months, on the Ukraine Independence Day in Kyiv, our Prime Minister Mark Carney announced 220 million for defense tech collaborations between Canada and Ukraine. It's in addition to what was announced for buying weapons, approximately 2 billion. So basically, exactly joint ventures, collaborations, reverse engineering, R&D centers, basically because it's now in our national interest of Canada, US, European countries to basically partner with Ukraine. This tech, which calls a fraction of cost for the expensive one. So Western countries, as we know, is great in developing precision type weapons, but those cost millions. Ukrainian tech, which is getting there in terms of precision, costing like fractions of that. And that's why we are trying to support, for instance, funds such as Dignitas Fund that opened its branch in Ukraine. Great American Connections, Luba Shipovich, the co-founder, who is also the co-founder of Razum for Ukraine, Maria Berlinska, who is known in Ukraine as the mother of drones. So we are basically helping them to also build this type of connections between Ukrainian and Canadian companies, or we do it in the US as well. And I would like to leave you with this. So let's basically make sure that we try to convince all decision makers to partner with Ukraine on AI. It's in our benefits as well. Ukraine needs investment, Ukraine needs collaborations, and that will make the world more secure and hopefully more innovative. Thank you so much.
Well, Oleksandr, you put me in a very bad position now. So it's hard after that bio to follow on. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Good afternoon, everyone. First and foremost, thank you very much, Walter, Andrei, and your team for organizing such important and good event. It's good to be here. Briefly about myself, my name is Richard Ogilchyn. I was born in Ukraine. I lived in many countries all around the world. For the last 4 years, I'm based out of New York, and I run an economic development and national security foundation called Grant Founders. What we do, we support emerging entrepreneurs and we make impact investments. For the last 3 years, we have supported over 100 emerging entrepreneurs, over 1,000 veterans, immigrants, and out leaders. We supported over 30,000 Ukrainians with humanitarian aid. We have arranged over 350 events for donors, investors, and entrepreneurs, primarily in East Coast and West Coast and other countries. And we continue supporting Ukraine, and we believe in Ukraine, and we believe that a big part of national security of Ukraine is an economic development and establishing partnerships with well-established investors and partners all around the world to learn after them and to bring them technologies and experience and knowledge in Ukraine and to build a new and grand Ukraine. So it's very important. So that's briefly about Grand Founders and what we do. Thank you.
Deputy Minister. Have we lost our Deputy Minister? Have we lost it? No. Deputy Minister Honchar, the floor is yours.
Dear colleagues, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, as I told, I am a Deputy Minister of Health of Ukraine. I graduated from Bogomolets National Medical University in 2014 and completed a family medicine internship. I began my career in primary care, then worked in private sector, clinical research, and in health, and as a health consultant in several organizations. I joined the Ministry of Health in 2019 and progressing from state expert, leading a division and then a department. And now I'm a deputy minister. In my current role, I help oversee the medical guarantee program. This is the biggest program in state budget, focusing on medical provision for all citizens of Ukraine. Also, I'm responsible for organization for medical care, financing reform of healthcare, and health technology assessment, and procurement and supply of medicines and medical devices. In recent years, I have contributed to key reforms, including strengthening centralized procurement and supporting the COVID-19 response and coordinating medical provision during the war. While my focus is mostly on civilian health system, I stay close, coordinated with colleagues supporting military medical service. For example, my former boss, supervisor, mobilized in early weeks of full-scale invasion, and now he leads first of its kind medical battalion within the Ukrainian ground forces that is advancing frontline medical evacuation. Ukraine is fighting for survival and at the same time building the future. The battlefield has become a strict teacher and laboratory for 21st century medicines. And our idea is simple. We save more lives when we bring care closer to the point of injury, make help resilient care at very edge of the network, and quickly turn real-world data into real-world evidence. And today I will propose several practical areas for cooperation between Ukraine and United States, and between the companies, between the business and academies also. Maybe they are technical in substance, but deeply human in purpose. First, time to blood. The most common preventable cause of death in war is uncontrolled bleeding. And so the answer is clear. Stop the bleeding as soon as possible and get blood to the patient. Now we are scaling drone delivery and freeze-dried plasma on site. Medics can use rapid intraosseous access, a special needle placed directly into bone when veins have collapsed from shock. And advice is simple and safe. A short message or a photo can get action even with minimal connectivity. So it's example how now modern technology like drone can save lives of injured soldiers. The second is also very important issue is ground drones for evacuation. When fire does not let medic in still, when fire does not medics in, still goes first. Remotely operated or partly autonomous ground platforms cover the last kilometers, the most dangerous parts. Because now we have kill zone, it's like nearly a dozen kilometers when nothing alive can be there. And a lot of injured soldiers can be evacuated only by unnamed machine like land drones. And it's really life saved. Third, extended care. Evacuation is often delayed. Helicopters have not evacuated anyone for a long time because they are restricted by air defense, and that is why we must upgrade not only bag but every soldier, the equipment and their skills. The goal is stay alive until operation room when the sky closed. Because in most of modern NATO paradigm is about golden hour and about helicopters evacuation, but really it's not working in modern war like in Ukraine. Also, we are working on precise evacuation. We are moving to targeted evacuation. This means that we know whom we are transported and where. We are trying to evacuate as soon as possible a person with, for example, with severe traumatic brain injury or with burns into to the best hospitals in Ukraine. And previously evacuation route was from like a lot of hospitals, a lot of days, but now we are trying to quicker and like removing unnecessary hospital to target injured soldier into the best one. And what I want to tell you is that next war will looks like similar to Ukraine. The battlefield has become distributed, saturated with drones and affected by electronic warfare. We already see it in local war conflict in, for example, in Africa, where drones are used widely, and it will be the similar also in another war with symmetrical opponent. If any states, modern states, will become like war began, it will be very similar. I guess it will be very similar to Ukraine with a lot of drones, with similar issues and similar problems. So it's the lessons from Ukraine can save a lot of lives and soldier and people, civilian also people in the future war. So it's, I guess it's very important to strengthen cooperation between our Miltech company, our biomedical company, and also, of course, with academic institution. Thank you. And I'm really open for answer if you have to. It's to me. Thank you.
We'll first go to Anna, our discussant, and then we'll open up for questions.
Thank you. First, I want to say thank you to Mr. Walter for inviting me. When I was first extended this invitation, I was concerned that I might not have enough to offer by way of experience and information. And then when I started writing notes, I ended up with 8 to 10 pages of notes, and I won't bore you with all of it, but I was surprised that I was able to accumulate that much information. My name is Anna Sczepanek. I direct a small nonprofit organization in the area of prosthetics. We are based in New York, and what we do as an organization is we collect excess and surplus prosthetic components that are here in the US in the prosthetics industry and redistribute them across the world, not only to Ukraine, but everywhere. We send that equipment to where there is a need. And as you can imagine, there is a very large need in Ukraine right now. As I was approaching what I wanted to say, I kept thinking about a quote that I don't really know where I heard it, but it goes something like, necessity is the mother of innovation. There are a lot of needs in Ukraine right now. There's a lot of necessity to develop a lot of different areas, but I can only speak to the one I know of. To start, the need is, there is a lot of new limb loss that has occurred over the last few years. Estimates report as of July 2025 that there are anywhere from 30,000 to 100,000 new amputees in Ukraine. That is not only a very large number, that range is also a very large number. That delta of uncertainty is very large. Just to compare, anytime I was looking into some of the research, a study kept coming up that compared the level of limb loss from the US wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, which resulted in a total of 1,705 amputations over a 16-year period versus, anywhere from 30 to 100,000 amputees in just the last few years. So, just looking at these numbers, we know this is a huge problem and a very large need to respond. And I wanted to kind of speak about the ways in which the prosthetic industry in Ukraine has responded, not just technologically. I know that this is a panel on biomed and cutting edge technology, but I wanted to just speak about it in two different angles. One is, in fact, the technology. There has been a lot of technological advancements that have occurred in the prosthetics industry globally, but also in Ukraine. So the first one is 3D printing. 3D printing has, over the past couple of years, emerged not just in the medical field, but even in recreational areas. You could buy a 3D printer and start printing things at home. But in the world of prosthetics, 3D printing is actually very interesting because it is able to offset a lot of time, because one of the most time-consuming parts of a prosthetic design and production is the actual socket, the part of the prosthesis that goes over the residual limb. And traditional manufacturing of that socket takes anywhere from 1 to 2 weeks using old casting techniques, molding, laminating. It requires big ovens, sanders, grinders. And now 3D printing, there's a prosthetist that can use their iPhone, scan the residual limb, and print it in 4 hours, the socket. So that is a very interesting and really innovative piece of technology that has really increased over the past couple of years. When I was attending prosthetic conferences, even just 3 years ago, the prosthetic industry was like, we're not really sure if the 3D printing filament is there yet. But again, there's such a need for it right now, not just in Ukraine, but across some of the other conflicts in the world, that I think the 3D printing industry has kind of accelerated the development of some of those technologies, not only outside of Ukraine, but inside Ukraine. The other piece of technology that I would say is really big in Ukraine as a result of the great need for it is some of the more advanced pieces of prosthetic componentry, and that refers to electronic knees. So these knees are, we call them microprocessor knees. They involve a lot of sensors, adaptive control, hydraulics, motors, that allow for a more natural gait and allow some of these, let's face it, young amputees to return to either the front or just return to an active lifestyle. These are young people who unfortunately are losing limbs. So some of these knees, they involve a lot of complex technology. It's a much more difficult fitting process. But again, the desire to acquire this kind of advanced knee and joint has inspired the prosthetics industry to work with the international manufacturers of these knees to become more informed on them, train on them, and be able to supply them to the amputees that are coming into their clinics. Similarly, this also affects upper limb amputees, which are notoriously very difficult to fit, but the technology in upper limb prostheses has also really evolved. Those are bionic and myoelectric upper extremity prosthetics, which are controlled by the user's actual muscle signals. Sensors are placed directly on the skin to detect small electrical signals. And when there's a movement on this residual limb, the electrical impulses are connected to the actual mechanics of the arm. It's really amazing technology. So similarly, there's a demand by these young amputees for this higher level technology. And so it has inspired a lot of development, again, not only not only outside of Ukraine, but inside Ukraine, to develop and be able to offer some of these technologies to the young veterans. There is even a company, a locally manufactured myoelectric arm called Esper Bionics that is Ukrainian based. So that's amazing to see that some of these companies are homegrown. They are being manufactured in Ukraine. So that's really wonderful. Another area that is still pretty new to the prosthetics world in Ukraine, but is slowly getting adopted, is osseointegration. This is a very advanced form of prosthetic fitting. It is essentially connecting the prosthesis directly to the bone, so it kind of bypasses the socket. And it's new outside of Ukraine still. We're only still in a couple of first years of it being offered. But again, there's a huge demand for it in Ukraine as well, just to be able to bypass the fitting of the socket, having to deal with refitting of the socket as the residual limb changes in size and shape due to muscle atrophy. It just is, it's a desirable operation to have, except it's just, it's very advanced. It requires orthopedic surgeons, it requires prosthetists, it requires very specific equipment, and it's only just now being introduced to Ukraine. All of that said, there has been an opening of a lot of new prosthetic and rehabilitation centers across Ukraine to accommodate all of these new individuals who have lost limbs. I'm not sure if any of you have heard of some of them. The Superhuman Center, which is widely known, Unbroken. These are two very big ones and have opened since the start of the war. One of the most notable, I'm going to call it an innovation, but it's really a response to the increase in the limb loss community in Ukraine, is the overall Ukrainian governmental response to the prosthetic and orthotic profession as a whole. So prior to 2022, prosthetics and orthotics, which here in the US it's a healthcare field. You go to school to become a certified prosthetist, orthotist. It's a master's level program. You become a certified healthcare professional. You need to be certified. You take exams, etc. In Ukraine, prior to 2022, it was not a formalized profession. You were trained in it. There was like a culture of apprenticeship. And so you learned the skills, and there are many prosthetic now called technicians who are very, very skilled in fitting someone who is in need of a prosthesis. But the government responded, seeing this now very large new population of amputees, realizing that, oh my gosh, we need to produce more prosthetists to help all of these people, because not just anyone can fit a prosthesis. And so really like a huge group of ministries. It was the Office of the President of Ukraine, Ministry of Social Policy of Ukraine, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Education, the International Society of Prosthetics and Orthotics, the American Board for Certification of Orthotists and Prosthetists, the Kharkiv International Medical University, and the Ukrainian Physical Therapists Association all came together to formalize and create the national professional standard for what it takes to become a prosthetist, and created the educational standards for what kind of courses do you need to take to become a prosthetist, how many clinical hours do you need to complete before you become a clinical prosthetist, what do you need to know, exams you need to pass. So that was a very, very important response to this new amputee population, because one thing we heard from the very, very beginning was, you know, Anna, you, Penta Medical Recycling, can provide us with as many components as you can, but what are we going to do if there's no one to fit them with? So education and the support of the actual industry and creating more prosthetists is key to this, to addressing this particular need. This also means that Ukraine and this new national standard is now on par with the rest of the world. I mean, this group modeled the standards based on US standards, on European standards, and they created a 2 years master's level program that requires 1,200 clinical hours, exams. That said, they also created a really great bridge program for those people who were apprenticed in and have been practicing for, call it, 2 decades, but don't have this formal education in this field. They created a bridge program to essentially give them the title of an official certified prosthetist orthotist under this new standard, such that you're not losing hundreds of people just because they're not officially prosthetists and orthotists. So that said, they created these new standards and created a bridge program to accommodate the existing professionals that had previously been working in this space. That said, it will be some time before all these new prosthetists will matriculate and will enter the field. It's a 2-year program, so we can do the math here. People have to enter school, pass the exams that have now been created. And at last count, when I went to the International Society for Prosthetics and Orthotics conference and listened to a panel on exactly this, as of this summer, there were, under this new standard, 34 official prosthetists in Ukraine, which is very low. However, there were still 340 technicians able to practice and fit people, but still 374 people is not nearly enough to address not only the 100,000 new amputees, but the existing amputee population that existed prior to the war. So I will conclude in saying that while Ukraine, I'll say, catches up and creates more prosthetists and orthotists to also accommodate some of these new technologies, which is now part of the curriculum, training on the electronic knees, the myoelectric arms, osseointegration is coming into the curriculums. I think it's important to recognize the importance of what the international community has done together to support the limb loss population, and just the overall international response from even organizations like mine. We have been providing components to some of these new master's level training programs so that they have components on which to train these new students. And other organizations like the ICRC, who have been helping support prosthetic components, there have there's so many organizations who have flown Ukrainian veterans into the United States, had them stay for a couple of months, been fit with advanced prosthetics, done rehab, and allowed them to go back. So there's such a long list of organizations that have really supported the need for prosthetics during this time. And it's been interesting to just see everyone kind of work together in this area while seeing Ukraine also build up its own prosthetics industry and respond in the way that it needed to. And I will conclude in saying it's been very inspiring to watch and see everything that has happened over the last couple of years, the collaboration that has happened, the support, and I'm very hopeful. I am inspired, and I'm very excited to see what other technological advances will occur in the field of prosthetics and orthotics. And yeah, I'm inspired and hopeful.
Okay, we'll now open up to questions. There are microphones on either end that will come to you. If you want to ask a question, stand up and please identify yourself. I see one over there.
Hi, Bogdan Hitmansky from the Ukrainian American Veterans. When these individuals get their prosthesis, are they given medical support for life, I would assume, the lifetime of their disability?
Yes, so it's actually very important that once fitted with a prosthesis, I think I mentioned, the muscle mass of the residual limb changes throughout. So it is an ongoing
Physical therapy
process. There's a lot of rehabilitation. And one thing I did not touch upon in all of this is people who experience limb loss, especially as a result of conflict and war, have other issues to deal with: PTSD, reintegration, finding jobs after now having a disability.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a multilateral approach. But when speaking about the long-term treatment, yes, having a prosthesis is a lifelong problem. Do I call it a problem? It's a lifelong process to deal with. You have to.
And they get support for life from the Ukrainian Ministry of Health, I would assume.
Yeah.
Okay. The other question I was going to ask is, and you may not know, but these veterans that do have amputations and whatnot, do they receive some sort of government pension for their disability?
That I do not know.
Okay.
That I do not know.
And
Does the deputy minister know?
Deputy Minister, yes. Do the veterans that are disabled, that have amputations, are they on a pension from the government for the disability?
Yes, of course.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
All right, next question. In the back, right behind you.
Hello, I'm Victoria Didich from Ukrainian Civics Club, and my question is, as you have stated before, you said that the hand is like a high-tech design, and how much would one of those like approximately cost for the soldiers?
That's a very great question. I can speak to some of the costs here in the United States. I don't know the costs in Ukraine, like the Ukrainian manufactured myoelectric hand. I do not know offhand the cost. However, I will say that the electric knees, the electric arms, while they seem very attractive and are, cutting edge technology, yes, they are, they may not always be appropriate technology for that moment. And I can just speak to not Ukraine, but generally, like I can say that, yes, the electronic knees are great, they're wonderful, but some of the other areas that my organization works in, they don't have regular electricity. So how would you keep a knee like that charged? So it's important to have appropriate technology provided to where it makes sense. I know that's not an exact answer to your question about cost, but to give you a sense of the knees, gosh, cost anywhere from like $50,000 to $60,000. Just the knee joint, not to mention the other components that go into creating the whole leg. The arm, I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that.
Thank you.
Expensive.
Over here.
That's all I can say.
Hi, Thomas Lang from Rebuilding Ukraine Association. I guess this question is to Grant. In your investments that you make or in grants into entrepreneurs and, if I understand properly, some businesses, how do you track the success rate of your investments?
40x for every delivered or donated dollar, we deliver 40x impact. So we got 250K donations last year, and the total impact, which is we got from our entrepreneurs, they informed us, they raised and signed contracts for over 10 million. So one of the entrepreneurs we supported in September 2022, we provided him a stage. He was a grad student after Stanford. We provided him a stage to introduce himself and his mission in front of our audience of well-established entrepreneurs and investors. And some of them decided to invest into his idea. Some of them helped him to secure contracts, even governmental contracts. All we required, because he's not Ukrainian entrepreneur, all we required is to hire Ukrainians or sign contracts with Ukrainian companies. And now, like for the last few weeks, he signed 2 contracts for 46 million in the total.
Dollars or
Dollars.
Yeah.
Dollars.
Very good.
This is public information. And some of our, we built a community over 2,000 of high net worth individuals, and we arrange special gatherings and events, and we always invite emerging entrepreneurs, among them Ukrainians, to provide them access to capital, knowledge, and experience.
That's excellent.
Excellent. I guess I would ask the same question to Mr. Wilson. How do you track success?
Wilson?
The gentleman isn't in the shop and does, he didn't come?
No, I think you're
Yeah.
looking at the.
So for tracking success in the AI field, it really depends on what type of projects. Again, there are traditional channels like venture capital, but in basically AI field is highly research intensive, and in R&D, you don't know at the end what you get. So, but what we are trying to do, and that was a great joke by Roman Vashuk, who was on one of the earlier panels. So at some point, 5 years ago, he asked me how R&D, research and development, is going to be in Ukrainian. And I said, well, I don't know. I mean, I know how to translate it. But he said, in Ukrainian, you just add at the beginning letter Z, at the end letter A, and you get Zrada. And that's what we are working on, so that we don't get Zrada from R&D. But success rate there is very uncertain, because it's a research. So you basically can spend, at least speaking from my experience, being an applied researcher in the industry for 15 years pretty much. So in some cases, you spend like months and years of research and you still don't get the results that you want. But in some cases, you are much more successful. But what we need capital for this field. We need investment in R&D in Ukraine.
Oleksandr, I wanted to ask if you could talk a little bit more about relationships with American universities. You made it sound as though there was not much going on. Is there? Do you have an overview of that, or is that asking you to go beyond your border, so to speak?
No, I always have an opinion, which even if it's not my area of expertise, but that's probably a downside of being a professor, because if you're not proactive and without necessarily having the knowledge or experience, like at the University of Toronto, where I'm a adjunct professor, just an example. So pretty much 10 years ago, I basically was talking to the Faculty of Applied Science and Engineering about offering a new course, which is Introduction to Data Science, Analytics and Artificial Intelligence. And they said, oh, we don't need it, blah, blah, blah. But when we really offered it, finally we agreed, we had 200 graduate students for this course. And that was, and I said that then, oh, that was the largest course in the history of the Faculty of Applied Science and Engineering at the University of Toronto. And now we offer it twice a year, graduate course, 160 students each semester, multiplied by 2. So pretty much, and that was unexpected to me at some point, that now I have 400 graduate students taking my courses at the University of Toronto every year. But coming back to your question about the universities, that's a very interesting interplay between Canadian universities, Ukrainian universities, US universities, what we are doing, and probably our greatest success for the American university in Ukraine is American University Kyiv, which we just founded right 2 weeks before the full-scale war started. And I got involved, so Roman Sheremeta, who is the founding rector, invited me to build the AI program. And over there, we have a great partnership with Arizona State University. But actually what happened, we opened the Master in AI and Business program earlier than they did. And if you talk about such other cases, in many cases, Ukraine innovate. But what we don't have in Ukraine, we need at the same time, when you offer, let's say, a new program, you need to do the market development. So it turns out that in the past, if we talk about AI field and education, so either you concentrate on technical side of AI, like Master of Data Science program, or you have an MBA program, really business side with a bit of emphasis on AI, but no technical expertise whatsoever. So when you try to merge these two, and that's what I frankly believe in too, so we need experts. And there was a panelist talking about the project management expertise lack in Ukraine. So it's not for everyone, but we would like to have professionals who have technical knowledge of AI and business and management knowledge to be able to implement those projects in practice. So from what I can say, the ecosystem of the US universities is great, but in many cases, and the same for Canada, in many cases, they are too slow. In Ukraine, you cannot afford to be too slow. Like in Arizona State University. So for instance, the program that they have called Master of Industrial Engineering. Yes, Master of Industrial Engineering is the word that they used for AI in engineering historically. But these days, you don't keep this historical naming of industrial engineering that people don't recognize. But to change that, we need 10 years of consultations, faculty meetings, approvals from the dean's level and stuff like that. So Ukraine didn't need partnerships with US universities, Canadian universities. What we would like to have, I would like to have a center of Stanford in Ukraine, center of MIT, any other in AI, and of course center at the University of Toronto in Ukraine. And that's where I think we should put our efforts to convince those universities. I know that there is no market for them in Ukraine. That's for sure. That's why kind of at this point they are making us a favor to enter in Ukraine if we agree. But at some point, and that's really innovation out of necessity. So they will basically learn quite useful stuff, how you become agile, how you implement fast, how you basically don't be restricted by the regulations. And that's what we need to convince that those universities can learn in Ukraine by entering the Ukrainian market, speed of innovation. We need to change. We all know that AI is changing the educational field as well. And the universities need to adapt. I'm sure that top universities will have no issues, but middle level universities need to adapt to this, and expansion to such countries as Ukraine is, in my cases, must.
Oleksandr, picking up on a comment you made, you may wish to look at a program at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland. They had great success in achieving many patents over decades and got good income from that. But one of their alumni noticed that the money being made off the patents was not from the people that invented them. So a program was set up to teach entrepreneurial skills to some of the engineers so they could take it to a business of their own, which I think is what you're mentioning.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Herman, I was actually, you're wonderful because you asked the question. You asked the question that I was about to ask all of you. because we do have the financial side, and we have the intellectual side, and we have the health officials, all of them here. The question I would have is, I don't want to say it's Terminator meets the RoboCop and meets evacuation capabilities that are 22nd century, because I'm hearing that we're able to get people off the battlefield quickly. It's interesting that all of that, plus the addition of Cave Polytech, I was very impressed when I went there. I thought that was the MIT. These characters, and were able to get my passwords to my bank accounts before the Russians and the Chinese intel people could. So my question is to Richard at this point. Richard, is there a possibility that it's not just about entrepreneurship? Is it possible that these grants for these great scholars that are doing enormous work, I know that they're doing it in the health industry, they're doing it in AI all over the universities. Is there a possibility that your grant founders and folks like you can also look at not just entrepreneurs, but what Herman just asked, the folks, man, that are at the cutting edge in the research part? Because I think in Ukraine, we have, in the United States, and this is a good question that you asked, in the United States and in Canada, we have money being granted to the researchers as well as to the entrepreneurs. Is there any possibility that that investors might be able to look at that, find a grants program for that?
This is a really great question. Thank you, Walter. I would start with, let's stop talking about Ukraine as underdog.
Right, right.
Ukrainian technologies
really
much
wild.
more advanced than most technologies in the world.
Yes. Yes, so that's what I'm realizing.
And the rest of the world has to learn after Ukraine. And Ukraine has a huge potential, knowledge, experience. The only point I would advance or improve is to learn how to build relationships and to move from underdog, evolve from underdog transaction to legacy, building relationships and trust. And in terms of R&D, it's very expensive. Ukraine has a lot of wealthy people.
Right.
And why we have to promote entrepreneurships? Because entrepreneurs, they are one of the most responsible people.
Right.
They pay salaries, they pay taxes, they support their families, their employees' families, their neighborhoods, communities, etc., etc. And if Ukrainian entrepreneurs are united and decide to allocate those capital as a donation or contribution, you don't need to go and run all around the world and beg for money. You have money. And Ukraine, we have money. We just have to come to the world and say, you can be with us and we can win together. We can dedicate 20%, you 80%, and we will make money for all of us. I believe this narrative and this communication and this message can change everything in building a relationship with other people. Because as I heard a lot of today, it's not donation or it's investments. Yes, it's investments. But investments, it's not transaction one day, one night, 1 week, 1 month. And to change, even like to approve a strategy, investment strategy at mid-level private equity fund, you need a few years. And it's a relationships and deliverables. And Ukrainians can do it with no doubts. And I believe once we unite more Ukrainian force and power all around the world and match with our counterparts from any country, we can do it.
Yes, if I may add, just very briefly. Yeah, thank you for mentioning the Kyiv Polytechnic. So, you know, I collaborated with them as well, but you see, public universities in Ukraine are very regulated and they don't have freedom. So that's why in most cases I collaborate with private universities such as Ukrainian Catholic University, American University Kyiv School of Economics, because that just it is so. And very actively, as I know, working on changing the regulations at the government level, Ministry of Education and Science of Ukraine, to really make, and we see a recent success of Kyiv Aviation University with a great new rector, Ksenia Semyonova, whom I know for a long time, to basically trying to modernize the state university, the public university, to pretty much get it to the more innovation level. But about the entrepreneurship and R&D. So such programs actually exist. In Canada, we have a research internship program which is called MITEX, and at the high level, it's a venture investment from the government of Canada and provincial governments into commercializing applied research. I was a MITEX research intern myself when I was doing PhD. I spent basically 2 internships, 4 months each with IBM, and after that I stayed full-time with IBM. And how it works, if companies hires an intern who is typically a senior undergraduate student or a graduate student or a postdoc, in that case, the government of Canada pays half of the salary and the company pays another half. So what you get for a 4-month research internship, the company pays 7.5K, the government tops it up with another 7.45K as a stipend. And that's one way to really encourage commercializing applied research at the companies. This program also works for the universities. And as I mentioned, we had 1,000 Ukrainian interns doing such internships. We have an international program as well, not only within Canada. So we joined this program in 2017. Ukraine joined as a partner country. It took us 3 years of advocating for that. But by now, 1,000 Ukrainian interns in these 7 years and more than 800 of them in the last 3 years. And that's a $10 million+ investment from the government of Canada into these internships. And that's really what we do. We come to Canada, to a company or to the university, and work on applied research project, which is with the possibility of commercializing it. And as a result, if it's within the company, it's automatic commercialization. If it's in university, it's maybe a spin-off, startup, partnership with a company. But that's a way to go, in my opinion. We were thinking about rolling out this type of program inside Ukraine, where there's pretty much co-funding from international donors. But in the Ukrainian system, and I'll probably not go into details, it's a bit tricky. They decided that that type of program is not needed in this shape or form, because Ukrainian companies typically don't want interns. They either hire students full-time or basically, or they hire interns and don't pay them. But those type of programs, we need to look more. Really commercializing R&D is the key.
Question. Okay, we have time for one more.
Yes, one more quick question. Oh, you got a mic. Okay. Thank you. Katerina Sidova, non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. To your point about both AI, emerging technology, and entrepreneurship, kind of 2 questions related to each other. One, have you seen interest from US AI labs, other technology companies in establishing joint ventures and doing the kind of seed investment into Ukrainian entrepreneurs, now united and a force of nature, to try and establish these kinds of collaborative startup investments? Is there any appetite you've seen for that so far? And the follow-up question on the DFC, have you seen any investment with this administration's focus on investment rather than grants? Any efforts, any lines of effort developing to try and build out this technology investment and cooperation with joint partnerships?
It's a question to me, right?
Both of us.
Oh, Oleksandr, please go.
Okay, so yeah, I cannot comment on the DFC side. Of course, that's probably Richard, you would comment on the first part of the question. Yes, there is interest, especially for AI in defense. Unfortunately, like if the traditional vehicles are used like venture capital for AI in defense, traditional venture funds don't want to enter because it's about killing people and stuff like that. There is not enough. We are helping some of the Ukrainian defense tech startups to find angel investors in Canada very hard. But what we are really advocating now to the government of Canada is a venture capital fund from the government of Canada for defense tech and especially for AI. There are successes like that. So European Union and Ukraine, a couple of months ago, they signed this brave Tech EU. So 50 million investment from both sides, European Union and Ukraine, into defense technologies, of course, including AI. but it's hard. So what we need to, in my opinion, to change, especially for AI in defense, it's a paradigm that it's about defense, at least for the Ukrainian side. You defend your own people with this tech. It's not basically targeting invading other countries. Ukraine will never invade other countries. But that's why we need to change this paradigm. That defense is important, and by investing in AI in defense, we are protecting our national security interests, US, Canada, and so on. For the AI outside of defense, unfortunately, there is not that much interest, and that's what we need to develop. So, of course, US AI companies, US AI labs needs to be there. We would like to find more ambassadors. So another example here, and hopefully you can chase this individual, Oleksandr, who is again a PhD student of Geoffrey Hinton, and that's why this name AlexNet, which is a success story of the convolutional neural networks and computer vision, some 10 years ago. He is now in the US, as if I remember. He's not in the spotlight, but he's has Ukrainian background, and we need to attract such caliber people to step in and become ambassadors of building collaborations in AI between the US and Ukraine, Canada and Ukraine, and so on.
Great. Last word will be Richard.
Oh, okay, I will try. I don't have such a data, and I don't think that kind of data exists. But what I know for sure, I have many friends, they raised solid amount of money, or their businesses, including Fortune 500 companies. And I always surprised very positively when I have a meeting with C-suite executives, and they always say, let's introduce you to our CTO. And their CTO from Kherson, from Mykolaiv, from Cherkasy, from Ivano-Frankivsk, and their teams are from Ukraine. And a very good friend of mine, he raised this year 950 million. It's one of the best quantum computing company in the world. And most of their staff are Ukrainians. And once we talk to them directly and learn about them a little bit more, we learn more, right? And what I really love and highly appreciate, it's a quiet authority. You don't need to, elephant never say they are elephants. Everyone can see it, right? And this is very, very positive trend. And I believe it should be like this in the future, where you can deliver the best results, and a lot of Ukrainians, they are participating in different programs and labs, and AI, it's not the end. We are about to step into quantum computing. This is the future. And I would rather speak about quantum computing and Ukraine as synonyms. Thank you.
And that's the last word. Thanks so much to the panel.
We have just about 5 minutes if you'd like to go grab some coffee, or there's brownies and cookies out there. But please do a quick turnaround.
Okay.
Walter.
Herman, I just wanted to thank you for that panel. This was absolutely wonderful, and I